The Montana Dreams Collection by Susan Hatler. Copyright 2016, audiobook, copyright 2024. The Friendliest Festival, Montana Dreams 1. Frustrated beyond belief, I slumped my chin onto my fist and studied the crowd at the Falling Leaves Festival as each person passed by my treasured creations booth without a second glance. Whoever said love didn't pay the bills sure knew what they were talking about. I loved living in Whitefish, Montana, loved my beading business, and even loved my tiny one-bedroom apartment. But once again, I found myself short on rent. I'd have to make a serious sale today or end up facing my landlord, Barry "Hit That" Benson, the bow hunter. Call me crazy, but it didn't seem wise to upset a man who could secure his family's entire season of food with one arrow. But then again, facing "Hit That" would be better than having to talk to my mother again. Last night, we'd had the same old phone conversation. "Holly, when are you going to stop goofing around in that little resort town, move back to the city, and get a real job?" she'd asked me. "Mom, I've told you. You told me you want a husband and family. If that's true, then where are my grandkids? You'll never find a man in the boonies, and you've been there since your college graduation. It's time to grow up and move back to civilization." The calls came frequently, but even my mother's desperate pleading couldn't make me give up on my dreams. I mean, hello? I had a view of Big Mountain from my kitchen window. I could bead jewelry, picture frames, or anything else my creative side brought to life beside that picturesque landscape. Well, if I continued to bring in enough dough. Voices clamored throughout the park, children squealed, and a soft breeze blew my bangs back, snapping my attention into the present. Instinctively, I gazed up at the tree-lined summit. Despite what my mom thought, despite how hard it was to earn a living here, this was where I belonged. Living in a city had far more job opportunities, movie theaters, and theme parks, true, but it didn't soothe my soul like this special little town with its 360-degree view of nature's amazing creations. A young couple skipped by with their daughter, laughing and smiling as they made their way to the lemonade stand. The familiar sense of longing swept through me. With only a month until my 30th birthday, it was hard to believe I was still single. According to my mom, I'd already be married with a family if it weren't for the low supply of eligible bachelors in this small mountain town. But wouldn't the right man also need these mountains and the surrounding outdoor jewels in order to feel complete? Wouldn't he wake up, excited to experience whichever outdoor adventure the season had to offer? With me? No, leaving this town could very well mean leaving the man I was just on the cusp of finding. I couldn't give up on what I wanted. I'd gone to the college I wanted. I'd started treasured creations like I'd wanted. And I wouldn't leave this place. Ever. As a figure approached my booth, I sat up and straightened my business cards. Then I inched the most expensive necklaces forward for good luck. "Hit That" would have his rent in full even if I had to rearrange jewelry all day long. "Hello," a husky male voice said. I snapped my head up, startled. The guy in front of me wore a flannel shirt that complemented his deep blue eyes. Eyes that were the exact color of agates I'd used in several necklaces. As I stood, my legs wobbled, and I tried to get a professional grip. "Hi," I said, wondering where he was from. No way could he be local, or I would have noticed him before. "Are you enjoying the festival?" "Very much." He glanced over at the lemonade family who'd just purchased rainbow-colored ice cream cones and laughed merrily when their little girl got some on her nose. For a second, the same longing I'd felt earlier seemed to reflect in his eyes. "Isn't she adorable?" I smiled, thinking about how fun it would be to have children of my own. I wish ice cream made me that happy. He leaned toward me and smiled. "Maybe you just haven't tried the right flavor." Goosebumps tickled up my spine, along with a rush of heat to my face, as I found my own secret meaning in his comment. Then I straightened, remembering this gorgeous man was here to buy women's jewelry. He didn't have a wedding ring, but he obviously had a special someone. Lucky lady. Is there anything in particular you're looking for? I asked. Honestly, I hadn't been looking. He bent down and studied some of the sterling silver and amethyst pieces in earnest. But when I saw your booth, I knew I had to come over. My heart squeezed. This guy had spontaneously decided to scope out a gift for his girlfriend? Quite the opposite of my ex-boyfriends who, even for a holiday or birthday, always held off until the very last minute to buy a gift. Where are you from? I asked, even though it had more to do with curiosity than making rent. Seattle. He lifted a silver and topaz bracelet, one of my favorite pieces, and examined it. Well, I used to live there. Seems like eons ago, but my buddies and I would come out to Whitefish every spring break to ski. The place has grown a bit. He glanced at me, then held my stare. Gotten better, I'd say. A shiver ran through me. Never thought I'd be able to work from home and move here. He twisted the bracelet, and the sun reflected off the orange gem. Lucky me, though. I bought a place on the mountain near the ski resort. My stomach did a forward flip. He wasn't a tourist, he actually lived here and, oh yeah, he was taken. He picked up one of my cards and put it in his pocket. Probably more information than you needed to know. Oh, I wanted to know everything about him. I just didn't want to know it. Congratulations on your new place. I'm sure you'll love it here. I took a deep breath, inhaling the musty smell of fallen leaves and his sandalwood cologne. I took a step back, giving him some space. Well, let me know if you have questions on any of the pieces. He gave me a sideways glance. Which would you want your boyfriend to buy for you? I stiffened. Me? I don't have a boyfriend. Then my cheeks went up in flames. Oh, you were just asking my opinion, weren't you? From a woman's point of view. He chuckled softly. Sorry, I'm not being very clear. It's been a while since. No, it's fine. That's my job. Of course, I can help you pick one. Lovely. Why didn't I just broadcast my unexpected crush in neon lights across my booth? Keeping my head down, I searched my display, the beads rolling through my fingertips. He needed help choosing for his girlfriend, and my dismal checking account balance told me I should lead him toward the more expensive items. I looked up and our eyes met. Held. There was just something about this guy. Something that made me want to give him my honest opinion. So I bypassed all of the higher price selections and gestured toward his hand. You're actually holding my favorite one. Really? He swirled his thumb over the precious stones. Watching the tender way he touched the stones, I couldn't think of anyone I'd want the bracelet to go to more. Yes, definitely. All right then. I smiled. Not just at the sale, but at how my treasured creations were inspired. I beaded that one last week. I just put the first stone on when a movement outside my window caught my eye. This black bear cub sauntered up to the berry bush at the edge of my yard, yanked a branch toward his mouth, and chomped on those berries right there in front of me. Wow! His eyes crinkled, as if he were really trying to picture it. That's incredible. Even more amazing was that the bear saw me watching him. I reached for a small white box and put a square of cotton inside it. He didn't run or seem scared, he just stared at me until he'd plucked every plump berry from that bush. Probably fattening up for winter hibernation. You've convinced me I made the right choice. After checking the price tag, he handed over the bracelet and the exact amount. It would only cover the rent if I lived off ramen noodles for the rest of the week, but the exchange with him felt priceless. I was sorry to see it end. Thank you, I said, laying the bracelet in the box and sliding it across the table to him. Hope she likes it. He picked up the box and then slipped it into his pocket. I'm sure my mom will love it. She's called me every day since I moved, begging me to move back to the city. Never going to happen, but at least now I can send her a peace offering. Every nerve in my body went on red alert. Had he just said, "I'm Dave"? He reached his hand across the table. I took his hand, and an electric current zipped through me. "Holly." He glanced down at our entwined hands, making me wonder if he'd felt the same tingly sensations I had. "Thanks for sharing that bear story, Holly. I'd love to hear more. Would you like to go to dinner with me?" Elated, I gave him a playful look. "Only if we can have ice cream after." He laughed. "Any flavor you want." "Deal." I grinned, knowing I had the exact flavor I'd been looking for. Whoever said love didn't pay the bills may have been right, but it still paid off in the end. I loved my town. I loved my work. And I couldn't wait to see what this next adventure with Dave would bring. The end. This is for all of the readers who asked for more of Holly's story. You're the ones who inspired me to create the Montana Dreams short story series, so thank you and happy reading. The Delightful Dinner, Montana Dreams 2. I'd never been so excited about a first date in my entire life, or as nervous. Maybe my mixed emotions were because I'd met Dave earlier in the day, right after I'd decided that finding the ideal man in my small mountain resort town of Whitefish, Montana, might be a lost cause. Or maybe the flutters in my belly had to do with how much I already liked him. Either way, it didn't help my nerves one bit when my mom called as I was getting ready and I'd, foolishly, told her about my unexpected date. She'd given me an earful that made me want to kick myself for answering my cell. "What do you even know about this guy, Holly? He could be an axe murderer, and you're walking right into his clutches." "He's not a criminal, Mom. He's a web developer." She scoffed. "That's what he says. You're taking separate cars to the restaurant, though, aren't you? I've always told you to never get in the car with a stranger." "Mom, I'm 29. Not 15. You're never too old to be cautious, dear. I don't want you to jump into anything without thinking, just because there are no other single men in your tiny town." And the lecture went on, let me tell you. I'd never been so happy to get off the phone in my life, but thankfully I had to leave for my date. My mom's words had shaken me, though, and I wondered if I should tamp down on my excitement that Dave could be the perfect guy for me. As I drove along the highway in my modest sedan, I glanced over at the lightly rippling sapphire blue water on Whitefish Lake. The lake's peaceful beauty usually calmed my nerves, but right now the picturesque view seemed to mirror the joyful possibilities this evening might bring. Not good, Holly. Not good. I parked my car in an available spot near Danica's, the restaurant where Dave and I had agreed to meet. I'd suggested Danica's since it had an amazing view of the lake, the service was fabulous, my friend Michelle was a waitress there, and the food was heavenly. The perfect combination for our first date. I turned off the ignition, then let my breath out slowly, trying to calm my racing heart which was galloping at high speed. Unsuccessful, I stepped out into the cool evening air, shut my car door, and promptly checked my reflection in a store window. Although I rarely wore makeup, tonight I'd put on a layer of black mascara that highlighted my hazel eyes. I'd left my natural chestnut curls wild around my head, and fortunately they rested playfully against my shoulders instead of going all frizzy. My lipstick had already faded, so I swiped another layer across my lips and sighed. If my mother could see me right now, she'd warn me not to put a whole lot of effort into what I looked like, nor get too excited about a first date with someone I barely knew. It annoyed me that I heard her warning voice in my head everywhere I went. She could be a tad smothering at times, but since my dad had died 4 years ago, we only had each other now. Plus, I knew she meant well. She just didn't want me to fall hard too quickly. Too late. Could I help it if Dave had the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen? that with our short conversation at the Falling Leaves Festival this afternoon, he seemed to be the first guy to get me? Finally, I'd met a man I seemed to connect with, who shared the same love for this Rocky Mountain town and its glorious outdoor beauty. Dave had also zeroed in on my favorite bracelet in the booth display for my beaded jewelry business, Treasured Creations, and purchased the piece as a gift for his mother. So sweet. He'd even seemed to enjoy the story that had inspired my selection and placement of the stones for the bracelet. Swoon. Oh man. I had it bad. Maybe I was a bit too eager since I'd just arrived outside the agreed-upon restaurant 15 minutes early and Dave was nowhere in sight. I smoothed my skirt, then sat on the dark-stained wooden bench outside the charming restaurant, which was situated right on Whitefish Lake. It was a beautiful evening in the fall, and although I needed a jacket, the weather wasn't chilly enough to warrant a hat and gloves yet. The sun sat low in the sky, illuminating a tree beside the road, whose branches hung heavy with amber leaves. Crisp air circled my calves, and I pulled my jacket tight. My date may not be here yet, but this was the perfect time of day to watch passers-by stroll along the trail of shops and restaurants parallel to the lake, and the jagged tree-lined mountains provided a breathtaking backdrop. Sitting on the bench, I watched an elderly couple amble past me holding hands, the wife peering into various store windows, not likely to be locals with their fanciful expressions. We still get the occasional vacationers this time of year. Summer's the golden time for tourism here, but winter brings in lots of skiers to Big Mountain. A family of 4 entered a popular pizza place across the street, and a group of guys headed into the highly frequented brewery on the corner. None of them, however, were Dave. I checked my watch, and now it was 5 minutes before 6 o'clock, our meeting time. I knew I shouldn't be disappointed that he hadn't shown up early, but it felt odd knowing I was obviously way more enthusiastic than he was about our date. Was it possible I'd only imagined the electricity between us? The front door to Danica's opened beside me, and someone stepped out. "Holly," a husky male voice asked. I glanced up, my gaze colliding with stormy blue eyes. His dark medium-length hair looked timeless, brushed away from his face, the ends of the thick strands tucked behind his ears. My stomach did a somersault. Oh yeah. The sparks were still there for sure. I stood on wobbly legs, giving him a shy smile. "Dave." "Hi." "Hi." His mouth curved upward, and he bent his head sideways, as if he'd been caught doing something secretive. I scoped out the restaurant early to get the best table. Wait, that meant he'd arrived way before I had. You did. Does by the fireplace work for you? He held the door open, gesturing in a gentlemanly way for me to go through first. The table has an incredible view of the lake. Sounds wonderful. As I passed by him, the scent of his sandalwood cologne intoxicated me, making me want to lean in and nuzzle his neck. He could be an axe murderer. My mother's voice invaded my brain, jerking me out of my snuggly thoughts. Obviously, I didn't think Dave had bodies buried in the backyard of his mountaintop home. But my mom's voice was a good reminder to take things slow and not get my hopes up that our first date would turn into something more. Then again, he had been thoughtful enough to secure the best spot in the restaurant for us. Major improvement from the last guy I'd dated, whose dinner invitation turned out to be heating up a frozen pizza in his microwave, then eating it in front of his television while watching a football game. Snooze. My stomach danced with anticipation as Dave and I followed the hostess to our table. Once we were seated, she handed him a wine menu, which he promptly opened. "Do you prefer red or white?" he asked, looking at me. "Actually, I prefer beer." I pressed my lips together, waiting for his reaction. Men usually liked it when I revealed my beverage of choice. "Really?" Dave's brows rose appreciatively, and the corners of his mouth tipped up as he scrutinized the beer selection. "Any recommendations on a local brew?" I gave him the name of my favorite, just as our waitress appeared. Holly Andrews. Michelle's face lit up as she smiled at me. I thought that was you. We missed you on the bike ride last week. Where have you been hiding? Oh. I hadn't realized Michelle would be working tonight. She was a loyal and trusted friend, but the girl had no filter for her thoughts. I sent a silent request to the universe that she wouldn't say anything inappropriate in front of Dave. Just working hard, preparing for the Falling Leaves Festival today, I said. AKA, trying to make rent, not lose the apartment I loved, that kind of thing. I had my dream job, beading jewelry at my kitchen table with a view of Big Mountain out my window, but selling my treasured creations at art fairs didn't exactly stuff my bank account full. Oh, right. The festival is the reason you've been busy. Michelle gave me a pointed look, threw her gaze at Dave, then twisted back toward me. Sure. My cheeks heated. I loved Michelle, but her bluntness was so not helpful right now. This is Dave. I gestured toward my gorgeous date, hoping my friend didn't start an inquisition like I suspected she was itching to do. He just moved here from Seattle. Dave, this is my good friend Michelle. She and I bike together, among other things. Hi, Michelle. He smiled, holding out his arm. Nice to meet you, Dave. She squeezed his hand, giving him an approving look. Then she leaned toward him, wearing a playful expression. Don't keep Holly all to yourself now. We had her first. Oh, embarrassment. Heat rose to my cheeks, but I couldn't pause to explain this was only our first date. Michelle was totally going to hear it from me later, though. Dave's eyes crinkled, and he raised his brows slightly at me, as if he'd guessed that Michelle could be a little overwhelming at times. For the second time that day, I felt like he understood me. My heart warmed. Then I remembered my mom's advice to take it slow, keep it light, and get to know him better before I plunged in head first. Being reasonable was so not my first choice. Would you like to hear our specials this evening? Michelle ran through her spiel with a huge grin on her face the entire time. I got the impression she felt I was hiding something, like Dave and I were closer than I was letting on. So far, only in my daydreams. I think we need a few minutes to look over the menu, but I've heard there's a great local brew I need to try. Dave shared a glance with me before ordering us a couple pints of my favorite beer. Could we also start with the chips and salsa? His hand slid across the table and touched mine. Does that sound good to you, Holly? My skin hummed from the brush of his skin against mine, and I tilted my head. Chips and salsa with beer? Only my favorite combo. Glad to hear that. His mouth curved upward in an enticing way that made me wonder what his lips would feel like against my cheek, against my mouth. I'll put your order in right away, Michelle said, interrupting my thoughts. Then she took off after giving me a smirk that said she knew exactly where my mind had gone. My cheeks heated for the second time since we'd sat down, so I knotted my hands together in my lap and stared at my open menu, hoping Dave was doing the same and wouldn't notice my face was on fire. I didn't want to colossally embarrass myself when I looked at him, so my best bet seemed to be to concentrate on what I wanted for dinner. Unfortunately, my eyes scanned the options, but my brain retained zilch. I kept my head down as Michelle returned with our beers, then she hurried to a table next to ours. An awkward silence stretched out until I couldn't take the sound of crackling embers from the fireplace or laughter from across the restaurant anymore. I peeked over at Dave and found him watching me. What? I blurted. His gaze held mine. Just glad I went to the festival today. An electric jolt zipped through my tummy. Me too, I admitted. His mouth crept into a smile that made me want to ignore my mom's warning. The excitement inside me only seemed to be growing, but I knew I needed to hold back emotionally until I got to know him better. There are a lot of options I've never tried before. He ran his index finger down the list of items on his menu. Elk. Buffalo. Which meal would you say is the most Montana? The wild arugula pine nut salad. I suppressed a grin at the odd look that crossed his handsome features, then gave him a side glance. I'm very Montana, and I'm also a vegetarian. Ah. He nodded, leaning toward me, and the glow from the fireplace flickered across his face. Since I'm mostly a meat eater, I'll have to brush up on some vegetarian recipes for when I cook for you. My tummy did a double cartwheel. Had he just alluded to a second date? Already? I was so going to be amenable to that. If we want to find common ground on a meal tonight, we could always skip dinner and jump to dessert, I joked. Great idea. What are your favorites? My mouth dropped open since I'd totally been kidding. For real? He raised a shoulder. Why not? Let's live on the edge. It was your suggestion, after all. I burst out laughing. Well, my taste buds are craving dessert, but shouldn't we force ourselves to eat the healthy food first? I think we should go straight for what we want. He raised a brow and sipped the froth of beer that rode the top of his glass. Watching him swallow, his words about going straight for what we want rolled around my brain. I was 29. Even though my mom would totally disagree, I longed to let my reservations go and take a chance with Dave wholeheartedly. Let's do it, I said, clinking my glass into his, completely caught up in his enthusiasm. A thrilling tremor ran up my spine. I sat taller. This first date felt more like an adventure. And I loved a good adventure. Michelle returned with our appetizer and asked if we'd made our decision on dinner. We ordered 4 different desserts: tiramisu, creme brulee, chocolate lava cake, and huckleberry sorbet, and agreed to share them all. I felt giddy from the suggestion of something so fun, and also of the impending sugar high. Dave raised his glass. Cheers to eating dessert first, making our own rules, and living in the most beautiful place on the earth. Cheers. I clinked my glass into his, and could feel myself falling further into the thrill of this date, hard and fast. Maybe restraining my heart was a lost cause, and I should work on getting to know Dave better. Find out if there were any red flags my mom seemed so worried about. So tell me about being a web developer. Dave swallowed, then set his glass down. I consult for a few big clients, but I'll occasionally accept projects for small businesses just for the fun of helping people build their dreams. How so? I asked, loading a tortilla chip with chunky salsa. Like the other day, I built a website for a woman who owns a pet grooming parlor because she wanted her customers to be able to book appointments and pay online. She's 80. It's her late-in-life project, and she was over the moon excited. How sweet. I watched his blue eyes dance, mesmerized by how passionately he spoke about his career. Quite the opposite of a red flag. My client loved the site I built for her and offered me free pet grooming for life. Only her business is in Florida, and I don't even own so much as a goldfish. His eyes crinkled when I giggled, then he popped another chip into his mouth. I basically have my ideal job, and now I get to do it with a view of the Flathead Valley out my window. You can't beat that. I kept my gaze on his as I sipped my beer, knowing I was sliding down the slippery slope of attraction, and soon there would be no way for me to dig myself out. I couldn't fathom that he was as excited about this date as I was, but the simmering look in his eyes gave me an inkling of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was feeling the chemistry between us too. Your turn. Dave leaned forward, grasping his glass. I'd love to hear about your business. I saw your work at the festival, so I already know you're talented. How did you come to be a jewelry designer? I flushed at his compliment. I started beading in high school and fell in love with creating new and unique pieces. At first, I gave the jewelry away as gifts. Necklaces, pendants, bracelets, you name it. Soon, family and friends started placing orders from me, and eventually word spread and more orders came in. The demand grew, and finally I started my own business. His gaze dropped to the point just below my collarbones. Did you design the necklace you're wearing? It's amazing! My fingers flew to the bald eagle charm clasped to the silver chain around my neck. With the pat of my thumb, I skimmed over the eagle's wings like I often did mindlessly, and paused over the bird's yellow crystal eye. Yes, I designed this one. Actually. Here we go, Michelle trilled, interrupting our conversation. I sank back against my chair, feeling simultaneously relieved and disappointed because I'd been about to tell Dave the story behind my design, which every instinct in my soul wanted to do, but that also seemed way too personal since I was supposed to be keeping things light. The desserts looked delicious. I stared at the plates, unable to believe we were really having dessert for dinner. Too awesome. Plus, thankfully distracting enough to buy me more time to get to know Dave. You two must have serious sweet tooths tonight. Or would it be sweet teeth? Doesn't matter. Michelle laughed, waving her hand dismissively. Enjoy, you guys. Thanks. Dave began slicing the desserts in half, then he separated them onto each of our plates while I watched, adoring how he worked so precisely. Ready to dig in? Definitely. I smiled, then sampled the huckleberry sorbet. Next, I tried the creme brulee, which tasted creamy and sweet like everything I had always wanted in a dessert. I moaned a little as I took a bite of the tiramisu. This was the best idea ever. Dave chuckled, then we were silent for a few minutes as we sampled our yummies. Finally, he glanced over at me. You started to tell me about your necklace when we got interrupted earlier. Is there a story behind the bald eagle charm? If so, I'd love to hear it. Yes. I blinked, surprised he'd remembered. Oh, wait. He was probably just being polite. But when I met his gaze, his look was intense, as if he really did want to know what I had to say. My tummy fluttered. Every part of me wanted to share the story with him, so I sucked in a breath. This was the first piece I made after I moved to Whitefish. He set his fork down, giving me his full attention. I sensed the necklace was something extra special. It is. My stomach warmed. How could he read me so well? My dad took me camping in Glacier Park when I was 10. We explored the surrounding areas and found a pair of nesting bald eagles here in Whitefish. We watched them for hours. They soared, hunted, and added sticks to their nest. The eagles seemed so in sync, working together for their future offspring. That must have been a sight to see, he said. It was. I fingered my bald eagle charm. I fell in love with Whitefish that first day. The animals, the hiking, the mountains, the rivers, all of nature's magical beauty. After college, I came back here for a visit to see if the area moved me as much as I remembered. It did. My dad died a few years later, but I still feel him here. In all the things we did and saw and shared on these mountains. I never returned to San Francisco. His eyes clouded. I'm sorry about your dad. I nodded, my throat tightening. Thanks. He leaned toward me. You came here all by yourself? That's very brave. I stared down at the crumbs on my plate. I was actually pretty scared to be on my own for the first time, so far away in this tiny little town, isolated from everyone I knew and loved, with only my small business to support me. I paused, remembering those first days, and the fear came rushing back. Then I lifted my head. My gaze locked with comforting blue eyes across the table, and a warm feeling washed over me. It was my secret dream to live in Whitefish ever since that camping trip with my dad. My mom protested big time. To tell you the truth, she still bugs me to move back to the city. But this is my home now. Dave was quiet for a moment, and I worried that I'd said too much. But when I studied him more closely, I was stunned to discover the look of amazement on his face. I felt the exact same way about this place. His voice was soft, barely a whisper. Then he cleared his throat. I came to Whitefish with friends for spring break in college. Once I'd skied Big Mountain, felt the cold powder whoosh up all around, something changed inside me. I felt a peace I'd never known before. When I received the opportunity to work from home, I had to take that leap of faith and move here. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. I smiled, understanding exactly how he felt in more ways than one. I get what you're saying about a leap of faith. My parents wanted me to move back to the city, and my friends too. It was a lot of pressure, and one day I debated whether or not to listen to them while I was sitting by the lake out there. I gestured past the window at Whitefish Lake and looked out at the reflection of tree-lined mountains in the glassy water. I sat on a fallen log, glanced up at the sky, and asked a silent question. "What?" His voice was barely a whisper. I asked for a sign to tell me if I should build my nest here or go. I closed my eyes, remembering that moment years ago. Then a bald eagle suddenly swooped over my head, powerful and amazing. A rush of adrenaline shot through me, and I can still see that majestic bird gliding toward its nest with his dark wings spread wide. "Incredible," he whispered. So I ignored everyone's rational arguments and listened to my heart. I opened my eyes and found Dave sitting alert in his seat, hands folded on the table. I'd never told anyone that story before, but somehow I knew he'd understand. My dad had told me bald eagles were the epitome of strength and bravery. I totally agree. They're amazing birds. Dave's resolute voice brought me back to the present. I lifted my lashes. I'd considered giving up hope, giving up on my dreams. And then that majestic bird flew across the sky and filled me with strength. Time stood still. I could feel the breeze against my face, and the whisper of the trees telling me to be brave and that everything would work out. It felt like a sign. I shrugged, eased one hand back, and clasped my necklace. "That might sound silly." "It doesn't," he said, his tone firm. "I designed this charm that afternoon and then called my mom and told her I was staying here permanently. As I told him that, I released the charm. It dropped back to rest tucked into my clavicle and felt warm against my skin, reminding me to be brave in any situation." Dave seemed to read my mind because he asked, "What does your mom think of you being out here still? Does she understand now?" "Not really." I lifted a shoulder, then took the last bite of sorbet, the cold berry flavor bursting against my tongue. After seeing the bald eagle, I'd made the decision to stay. My mom still worries about me, though. Currently, she's worried you're an axe murderer and that she'll never see me again, I blurted. Dave choked on his beer. "Well, I take it as a compliment that you told your mom about me. Tell her to rest assured I don't even own an axe." I rubbed my forehead, then placed my hand on the table, embarrassed that I'd told him about my overprotective mom. But I wanted to be brave and let him get to know the real me. She tends to overreact, but she means well. I'm sure she does. He signed the bill that I hadn't even noticed had arrived, and I thanked him for our dessert meal. An unreadable look crossed his face, then he reached across the table for my hand. "My mom is the same way as yours," he said. Tingles danced along my skin as he laced his fingers through mine. "Really?" He traced the edge of my palm with his thumb, something flickering in his blue eyes. "My younger brother is autistic. One time my mom turned her back to do the laundry and he wandered out of the yard. She panicked when she realized he was missing." I gasped. "How awful." He nodded. It was 3 long hours before we finally found him at a park several blocks away. Now she overcompensates with her protectiveness. A lump formed in my throat and my eyes watered. I understand holding on to the ones you love. When my dad passed away, my mom tried hard to get me to move back to the city. She still tries. I know it's because she loves me, but I belong here. His gaze caught mine and held. We didn't speak any words, but an electric current of understanding ran between us, and I felt an invisible tug, drawing me closer to him. We'd finished all of our desserts, and I could sense that the night was winding down, but I wasn't ready for the evening to end. Not even close. "Would you like to take a walk by the lake?" Dave asked as if he could read my thoughts. Seemed he could do that quite easily. My heart fluttered. Definitely. Together we rose, each of us wearing a smile. This had been the most incredible first date of my life, and I was glad we could stretch out our time together a bit longer. Dave held the back door open for me as we walked out of the restaurant and headed down to the path that skirted Whitefish Lake. We stepped onto the deck as the late-setting sun cast a final golden sheen on the surface of the water, and the pine-studded mountains across the way grew shrouded in shadow. Completely and utterly radiant. This was the perfect way to end such a perfect night. I tried so hard to keep my feelings at bay, but the evening had only served to pull me closer to him. I could feel magic in the air and the beginning of something special. We stopped at the edge of the dock and side by side, we stared out at the lake. A smile played at my lips as I gazed up at the sky's dark hues as twilight crept over the mountains, bringing the night in softly. We'd lapsed into a comfortable silence, yet I was keenly aware every time our arms brushed against each other. I longed for him to kiss me, but he didn't make a move, and I couldn't gather the courage either. I squeezed my eyes shut, asking a silent question that the connection I was feeling wasn't all in my head. When I opened my eyes, I saw the dark spread wings of a bald eagle as it swooped down to the lake, kissing the water with its feet as it plucked a fish from beneath the surface in one swift motion. It was another sign. My breath caught in my throat and my heart rate kicked up as my hand flew to my necklace. Then the powerful bird flew toward the trees, and I watched it get smaller and smaller until it disappeared in the night sky. Completely exhilarated, I turned to Dave. "Did you see that?" "Yes." He peered down at me in a way that felt like he could see into my soul. For the third time that day, it seemed like he understood me in a way that no one before him ever had. I never wanted that feeling to end. I stared up at him, mesmerized, until he reached out and cupped my cheek in his warm hand. With heavy-lidded eyes, he eased toward me. Butterflies fluttered in my belly. My lashes lowered, and when his lips brushed mine, a feeling of peace washed over me, the same feeling I'd had when I'd first laid eyes on Big Mountain. Pure. Magical. Everlasting. I poured all of my heart into this unexpected kiss, knowing that being brave and taking risks was the way I wanted to live my life, the way I would make all of my dreams come true. "I'm glad you took that leap of faith," I breathed. "Me too," he whispered. We both leaned back and gazed into each other's eyes, until we simultaneously smiled. Then I pulled him closer and he kissed me again, deepening his kiss this time. Here in each other's arms, we were both home. The end. The Brightest Boutique, Montana Dreams 3. I trekked up the mountain in my beloved small town of Whitefish, Montana, waiting for that blissful feeling that hit me every time my boyfriend, Dave, and I hiked together. That feeling didn't come. Instead, every muscle in my body tightened, because in 5 hours I had to make a decision that would affect my entire future. No pressure or anything. As my legs propelled me up the trail, my mind stayed focused on the dilemma regarding my business, Treasured Creations. Making a living beading jewelry with a view of Big Mountain out my window was pretty much a dream come true. Not that I was getting rich off my career choice, far from it actually. I struggled to pay bills each month, but my ability to gaze out my kitchen window at nature's beauty while I worked felt priceless. Just this morning, I completed setting the stones on a darling butterfly charm while watching the first snow of the season drift gracefully onto the mountain. The ethereal white flakes filled me with joy, until my brain spiraled back to my impending decision. Gulp. I decided to keep the butterfly charm for myself, hoping it would give me luck in making the right choice for my business, ergo my life. Until now, I'd sold my originally designed creations at local festivals, craft shows, and street fairs. I also had quite a lot of return customers who purchased items from me over and over. Then 2 days ago, Karen, the owner of Moxie, a charming and successful shop downtown, called and made me an offer. I nearly fainted when she announced she wanted to carry a special line of my jewelry to sell in her store and online. So flattering. Moxie's new website would launch this Monday, so Karen needed an answer from me right away in order to promote my products in her announcements. I had until 5 o'clock this evening to give her my answer. In the back of my mind, I could hear a virtual clock ticking, and my stress level ratcheted up with each tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. I chewed my lip and fingered my butterfly charm as I followed Dave up the steep trail, wondering what I should do about Karen's offer. To say I was a simple girl would be putting it mildly. I just turned 30, lived in the same small one-bedroom apartment I'd rented when I moved to Whitefish after college, and loved hiking, biking, skiing, and basking in the surrounding beauty of the little slice of heaven where I lived. 2 months ago, I'd met Dave at the Falling Leaves Festival. He and I shared the same love for this special mountain resort town and all of the outdoor activities this magical place had to offer. At least once a week, we hiked up this same trail on Big Mountain with our picnic bag in tow and ate our lunch once we reached the top. Each time we made our pilgrimage felt just as special as the last time. We spotted new and exciting things on every hike: a squirrel, white-tailed deer, bighorn sheep, and once even a black bear. We talked about anything and everything. There seemed to be a bottomless wealth of topics we enjoyed discussing, and each new piece we learned about each other brought us closer together. If hiking the same trail kept bringing me joy, then wouldn't the same follow to keep the status quo with the jewelry business I loved so much? Why make a change when the current plan works so well? Oh yeah. Savings. Retirement. Not having to stress over paying bills. The ticking clock in my head suddenly got louder. I wanted to talk to Dave about the offer, but the insecure part of me worried what he'd think if I made the wrong choice. I wanted to kick myself for being such a coward. Instead, I tripped over a tree root. "Everything all right back there, Holly?" Dave called over his shoulder, his blue-eyed gaze connecting with mine, making my tummy do a somersault. "I'm fine," I said, although stressed out of my mind might have been a more accurate assessment. He mumbled something I couldn't quite hear. Then he glanced off the path, clambered up on top of a large boulder, and held out his hand to me. I reached out, curling my hand into his, and tingles skittered up my arm. Even after being together for 2 months, the sparks between us were stronger than ever. Shiver. "We're stopping before the top of the mountain this time?" "Okay." I felt breathless as he pulled me up next to him. With his arm around me, we gazed out at this new-to-me view of the Flathead Valley below. It was gorgeous. The jagged white-capped peaks of Glacier Park provided a powerful backdrop, contrasting our tiny town nestled below, and the shimmering blue of Whitefish Lake stretched off to the north. But the beauty dimmed slightly due to the angst of my looming deadline. "Don't you think this path gets better every time we come out?" I asked. "I think our path gets better every day we're together." He pulled me close, his eyes gleaming with such unabashed intensity that my cheeks heated. "You're too sweet." I dropped my gaze for a moment, wondering if he'd continue to look at me like that if I chickened out on this project, which had the potential to take treasured creations to the next level. Or, on the flip side, putting all of my stock into this one sales channel could cause my business to go under. My stomach clenched. When hiking a trail is this good, there's no reason to make a change. Don't you think? The corner of his mouth tipped up, then he leaned in slowly and brushed his mouth lightly across my lips. Then he pulled back and hopped off the rock. "I think it's time you told me what's going on in that pretty head of yours." I tilted my head, my chestnut curls flopping against my shoulder. "What do you mean?" "You've been clutching the charm on your necklace since we left the trailhead." He reached for my hand that gripped the charm and gently released the butterfly from my grip, letting it rest against the round-neck thermal shirt that peeked out beneath my jacket. "You work your pendants like a worry stone when something big is on your mind," he said. "I do." A ripple of excitement rolled through me that he already knew me so well. But the feeling quickly dissipated, replaced by a weighted boulder invading my belly. When Dave held out his hand, I grabbed it like a lifeline and jumped off the rock. We were silent as we trudged up the incline, holding hands, until we came to a fork in the trail. He turned to me, raising one brow. "We always go right. Is it time to make a change?" I closed my eyes for a moment, imagined getting 0 orders through Moxie, then promptly swayed on my feet. My eyes flew open, my fingers flew to my charm, and I shook my head. "Let's just stick with what we know." "Your call," he said, and started back up the trail. "But I'm here if you need me." "Thanks." I smashed my lips together, wondering what Dave's advice would be about the potential deal with Moxie. He'd given up a corporate life to be a freelance web developer, so he knew about making tough business decisions for himself. And I knew he was successful in his work. But would I be successful? What if I failed big time? When we reached the top of the mountain, we found our picnic spot, which sat on a flat, bald outcropping of rock. Small remnants of the thin layer of snow from this morning remained, and the rock still had a few icy spots. Since it was late November, the big snow would drop soon, coating the mountain in white and holding throughout the winter. Right now the season was in transition, with one foot out the door and one foot still inside. I could totally relate. Sigh. Up here on the summit, the view of the valley was even more spectacular. A large bird flew from a tree below, but it was too far away to tell if the dark bird was a bald eagle or an osprey. Dave and I usually dangled our feet off the edge of the rock as we ate. But with my stomach in knots, this seemed like a good time to be cautious. I turned to see what Dave had packed for lunch. He was an amazingly good cook, and our lunches always had a theme, things like Italian countryside, which had included wine and pasta. "I thought we'd do a little American West today," Dave said as he pulled out containers of vegetarian chili and homemade cornbread. I let out a happy sigh. "You spoil me." "You deserve to be spoiled," he replied. I bit into a piece of cornbread, the sweet taste filling my mouth. The corners of my lips curved upward, and once again, I felt truly lucky to have met Dave, who was so sweet and thoughtful. "This is delicious. Thanks for the wonderful lunch." There's that smile I know and love. He winked at me, then popped a spoonful of chili into his mouth. "You're very welcome." I breathed in, the scent of pine and earth filling my lungs, but even that familiar smell couldn't relax me. I knew I needed to talk to Dave about my problem, and I was running out of time. So I swallowed my last bite of cornbread, a tiny frown tugging at the corners of my mouth. I felt far too vulnerable as I looked up at him. I feel like I'm at a crossroad, and I don't know which way to turn. His brows came together. "How come?" I closed the container that had held my lunch, set it beside me, then took a deep breath. "I got a call from the owner of Moxie, that boutique downtown. She offered me a contract to start carrying a few lines of my jewelry. Not just in her store, but on their new website." "Okay." Dave nodded, then squinted off in the distance. He used this expression when he was listening and thinking about something deeply. "And there's an aspect of the offer that's obviously bothering you." "Yes," I blurted, feeling like that one word had released the block in my throat. If I sign the contract with Moxie, then there are all sorts of things that could go wrong. I mean, after reading the contract, I know they want at least 200 pieces of jewelry initially, including earrings, necklaces, and bracelets. That's a lot of new product to create. Sure, they will be duplicates of the original design of that line, but with that heavy of an order, the quality would probably suffer. Is it really worth jeopardizing quality for quantity? He raised his palms. "Holly, Plus, there's the added cost of supplies. I'd need to use everything I have in stock to make the first pieces for the store, and I don't know. It's just too scary. A chilled breeze whipped by, blowing my wild curls around my face. My eyes stung, but I was pretty sure that wasn't caused by the cold wind. What if no one even buys my stuff? I don't think that will happen. His eyes filled with emotion as he reached toward me and tucked my hair behind my ears. Your designs are incredible. Like the butterfly charm you're wearing right now. The pattern of the stones is unique, and the colors are vibrant. Just looking at that one piece brings on a lot of emotion, as if a piece of the artist is in the design. An incredulous laugh escaped my lips. That might not be such a good thing, since I made the butterfly this morning while this quandary swirled around my brain. My muse probably chose the butterfly because they're in hibernation right now, which is where I'd like to be. He chuckled at my sad attempt of a joke. I'm sorry you're upset, Angel. I want you to know that no matter what you decide about the contract, I'll be here to support you. How long do you have until you need to make a decision? Only until 5 o'clock today. I dropped my forehead against his shoulder, then buried my face in his warm neck. He pressed a kiss to the side of my head. That doesn't give you much time. I know. I mumbled, feeling my chest tighten. I lifted my head. Until now, I've been this dinky little farmer's market craft show seller, which I've loved with all of my heart. But to have my jewelry available in a popular store and online? If the items didn't sell, that kind of rejection would be devastating to me. Dave sat quiet for a long time, with his arm around my waist. It felt like a comfortable, contemplative silence, and I hoped the perfect decision would come to me. No such luck. A bubble of laughter came out, and soon I rolled over giggling almost uncontrollably. Whoa there, he said, pulling me back from the edge of the cliff, even though I wasn't nearly close enough to go over. What's so funny? I got my laughter under control, clearly I was losing it, and sucked in a few hiccupish breaths. It's just, my mom actually thinks I should sign the contract with Moxie. As you know, she and I rarely agree on how my life should go. So if my mom thinks this deal is a good idea, then I should probably turn down the offer and run away screaming. Dave caught my cheek in the palm of his hand, and his mouth curved upward. Maybe she just really believes in you. Like I do. With the back of my head against the cold ground, I stared up into the eyes of my boyfriend, who I never thought I'd find, and knew he meant every word he said. He believed in me. Maybe my mom did too. Still, there were so many things that Dave didn't know about me, probably because I hadn't shared them with him. Maybe it was time to clue him in on my humiliating past. We should get going. I sat up, dusting myself off. I didn't bring my cell phone, and there's a call I need to make soon. If this contract were a good idea, then I'd be more excited about it. He gazed back at me, and his eyes held no judgment. You've made your decision then? He asked, slinging his backpack over his shoulders. Yes. I nodded, leading the way down the trail. What I had to tell him now wasn't going to be easy. I didn't like to think of that time in my life, let alone talk about it. But if Dave could give me his unconditional support like this, then he deserved to know all of me, the good and the bad. I glanced over at him. I haven't told you about this pivotal moment of my childhood, I said, my voice cracking just a little. I'm listening. He gave me a side glance as he looped his thumbs through the backpack straps. I gave him a weak smile. When I was in middle school, I signed up to participate in my first craft show. My class was raising money for our trip to Washington, D.C., and the students voted to have a craft show instead of a bake sale. I had the best idea for designing my booth. I wanted to make and sell friendship bracelets, since they were all the rage back then. Everyone loved them, even the boys, and I was sure I'd make a ton of money for the class. So I purchased all different colors of embroidery floss and worked hard after school and on weekends creating the bracelets. That sounds great. He smiled over at me as we rounded the corner to turn past the fork in the trail where I'd taken the same safe route earlier. You were an entrepreneur even at 12. That just shows how ready you were to launch your business when you came here. That's not the point, sadly. I wish the results of my fundraising efforts were that I felt secure about setting myself up as business owner, but the opposite happened, I said, my heart pounding against my ribcage so hard that I finally stopped beside a huckleberry bush to catch my breath. Even though it had been almost 2 decades, the memory resurfaced, still feeling terribly painful after all of these years. Part of me wanted to hide from the incident, but a bigger part of me wanted to share this with Dave. It would be a huge step forward in our relationship. As an adult, nobody besides my mom knew what had happened to me. Tell me the rest, he said, brushing my hair back from my face. Let it all out, Angel. My throat tightened. Like I said, I worked hard on my display. My mom bought me all sorts of art supplies so I could put up advertising around town. On the day of the craft fair, I got to school early so I could set up in the gym. The booth looked amazing. My mom even took a picture. I paused, my cheeks heating as I remembered that humiliating event. I came across that old photo the same day I got the offer from Moxie, and it reminded me of what happened. What? He asked. After putting my heart into all of that work, I didn't sell a single bracelet. My stomach dropped, and I stared at the scaly trunk of a western white pine tree in front of me. A girl in my class, Kara Carruthers, had told everyone that I'd bathed the strands of the bracelets in cat pee before I made them. Cat pee? He asked, his tone incredulous. Yep. My gaze traveled upward, following the 200-plus foot tree to its top. I admired the tree's ability to stand strong and majestically year after year. I always thought I had that kind of strength, but right now all I felt was fear. People from my class said Kara swore I'd told her that cat pee was my secret for making great bracelets. People believed her? Apparently so. I shrugged, glancing at Dave's surprised expression, and then starting back down the path. I'd thought Kara was my friend, so I hoped the rumor had been a mistake or something. When I confirmed it was true, I felt determined not to let her mean spirit get the best of me. I stopped and groaned at the memory of what happened next. This is so pathetic. What is? He asked, his voice soft. Tears burned the backs of my eyes. I decided if nobody would come to my booth, I'd take my bracelets through the aisles of the craft fair and sell them to the students who were walking around. By that point, everyone had heard Kara's story, though. I still couldn't sell any of the bracelets, and a few students made cutting remarks to me. His jaw pulsed. Kids can be so cruel. No joke, I replied, nausea building in my belly. That was bad, but when I got back to my booth things got even worse because all of the remaining bracelets were gone. Someone had stolen them. Dave blew out a breath. I'm a 30-year-old man, but I'm wishing I could go back in time and guard that booth for you. Trust me, nobody would be touching those bracelets unless they were purchasing one. My hero, I said, slipping my hand into this. We hiked further down the trail with our hands clasped together, arms swinging back and forth. Guess what else? I found out later that Kara had taken the bracelets and sold them as her own. Not only had she ruined my efforts to raise money for our class, but she'd also taken credit for my work. Such a double whammy. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said, his tone sincere. Thanks. I shrugged. I'm sure everyone has their own tragic childhood story. Maybe there's something about that kind of blow when you're young that stays with you for the rest of your life. But I failed, and that's what hurts the most. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. He stopped suddenly just before we reached the rock we stood on earlier, and he dropped his backpack to the ground. Then he slipped his arms around me and pulled me close. He pressed his lips to my cheek, his breath warm against my ear. I'm glad you shared that story with me, he whispered. Me too. I melted against him, and the heavy weight on my shoulders lifted, making my burden seem so much lighter. I know that happened a long time ago, and that kids can be mean. But that doesn't erase that feeling of failure that hit me when I saw that photo of my booth again. I'd been thrilled about the offer from Moxie until I saw that picture again. My business is going well enough, and I don't think the risk of failing is worth the potential reward. He pulled back a little. Instead of looking disappointed in me, his eyes lit up. So you were excited about the offer from Moxie initially? Yes. My eyes widened. I was chickening out on expanding my dream and being a complete wimp because a thief from 18 years ago had made up a rumor about cat pee and had stolen my bracelets. Why did Dave look happy about that? He squeezed my hands between his, shaking them up and down as if he couldn't contain his excitement. Even though what happened to you was terrible, do you know what's ironic about it? His smile widened. That girl, Kara, must have thought an awful lot of your work if she sold the bracelets and passed them off as her own. Right? Maybe she was envious of your talent and handled it badly, which wouldn't excuse what she did. But that would mean that you succeeded in creating products so desirable, even the quintessential mean girl had to have them. Adrenaline shot through my veins and I blinked, ducking my head as I realized what he said might be true. I never thought of it that way. Do you know what else? He lifted my chin, so I met his gaze. You and I were talking earlier about your creative method and how each piece of jewelry you make contains a part of your soul. I don't think it's an accident that you created that butterfly charm this morning. And I certainly don't think you chose a butterfly because you wanted to hibernate or hide. My fingers flew to my charm. Really? Your subconscious knows you're in transition. For instance, there's a long time where the caterpillar is busy building up its resources before it makes its chrysalis. My brows quirked. Are you saying I'm a caterpillar living in a cocoon? Because that doesn't exactly feel like a compliment. He shook his head. No, you weren't inspired to create a caterpillar charm. Were you? Because when the time is right, the caterpillar emerges and becomes a beautiful butterfly. You've been building up resources in your business, building your clientele, and when you're ready, your business, treasured creations, will emerge into something bigger than it is now. My heart caught in my chest. His faith in me meant more than he could ever know. I swallowed hard against the lump that had formed in my throat. You know, I said slowly, there are so many things I'll lose if I don't accept the contract. Like the ability to make enough money to set aside to buy a house someday. Having a little more money would be a nice perk, he agreed. And making enough to start saving for retirement, I said, standing taller. In addition, Moxie can provide me with a bigger audience, and I'd love to reach more people to share my creations with them. You do have an amazing talent. He ran his thumb along the back of my hand, sending tingles up my arm as he gently pulled me closer. All of my designs have to do with the joy of living in this small town. Our town, you know. I mean, when you get right down to it, that's what I'd be sharing. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed my palm. I definitely think that's something worth sharing. When I think of it all that way, there's no reason not to accept the contract. I swiveled, pulling Dave up onto the rock we stood on earlier. With him beside me, I looked out over the valley again, and the lake glimmered in the distance, the same deep shade of blue as one of the stones I'd put in my charm. Exhilaration flowed through me, and this time there was no anxiety. Dave's arm tightened around me. The view is beautiful, isn't it? We're so lucky, Holly. I want you to know that whatever you decide with your business, I support you. Thank you, I said, leaning into him. Had I really been scared to open up to Dave? The past couple weeks my feelings for him had been growing into something else, something bigger, just like the caterpillar with its cocoon. But deep down, I wasn't sure if he felt the same way. I'd been worried about moving forward with him, but now I was ready to take that risk. Then it hit me unexpectedly, the real reason I designed this butterfly. I turned to Dave, fingering my charm. You were right that there was a reason I created this butterfly this morning, but it has nothing to do with treasured creations. These past months with you have been amazing, but I'd held a little piece of myself back. Until today. Holly. I love you, Dave. My breath caught in my throat, and tears blurred my vision. I really, truly love you. I love you too, he whispered, then leaned down and captured my mouth in a sweet kiss more beautiful than the magical valley surrounding us. When we broke apart, I smiled. I'm going to sign the contract. He caressed my cheek and grinned at me. I kind of thought you might. Just as he leaned in to kiss me again, I noticed a fluttering from the corner of my eye. There, among the sparse huckleberry bushes, was a single butterfly dancing over an outcropping of rock. I laughed aloud and knew it was a sign of good things to come. The end. The Memorable Mountain, Montana Dreams 4. I paced back and forth in front of the trailhead and inhaled deeply, the crisp morning air serving as a tragic reminder that the perfect life I'd been enjoying in my peaceful mountain town was about to shatter into pieces. It was late in May, and the chilly weather we'd had all month made this time of year feel more like early spring, but today there was a hint of heat shimmering in the air that whispered summer would be here soon. Unfortunately, my nerves were too raw to care. My boyfriend Dave would arrive any minute to hike up Big Mountain with me, per our usual routine, and I really needed to pull my emotions together before he arrived. I couldn't let him know that his unexpected proposal was ripping my heart to shreds. No, I had to be strong. Dave had supported me unconditionally when my business had expanded, and he deserved the same respect from me now. Even if his fantastic work opportunity meant our relationship was about to end. My heart squeezed in my chest. Our past 8 months together had been beyond amazing. Snowshoeing in Glacier Park, skiing the backside of Big Mountain on perfect powder days, debating which movie to watch on a Saturday night, endless cuddles and kisses. So, as a practical woman, you'd think I should have had some inkling that life couldn't go on this ideally forever. Nope, not a clue. I pressed the heel of my hand to my forehead and squeezed my eyes shut. Dave and I met at the Falling Leaves Festival last year when he'd approached my jewelry booth, Treasured Creations. I remembered how sweet and thoughtful he was when he'd purchased a lovely topaz bracelet from me as a gift to his mother. I'd gazed into his beautiful blue eyes as we chatted, feeling an immediate connection with him, not to mention sparks galore. Ooh, baby! To say I'd been thrilled when he asked me out to dinner would have been putting it mildly. A colony of butterflies had fluttered in my belly. I quickly fell head over heels for Dave. In addition to the electric chemistry between us, he and I had a lot in common. We both moved here from the city, shared the same passion for the outdoors, and deeply loved our small resort town of Whitefish, Montana. My dad had taken me camping nearby in Glacier Park as a little girl, and I became immediately hooked on this area. We'd had the best vacation ever, swimming in the lake, watching the bald eagles soar, and roasting marshmallows over the campfire. Even though my dad passed away 4 years ago, I still felt his presence amongst these mountains. Dave's affection for Whitefish came from spending spring breaks skiing on Big Mountain with his friends back in college. He told me he felt a sense of peace here that he'd never experienced anywhere else, and I could so totally relate to that feeling. Unlike my past relationships, Dave was the perfect boyfriend. He was smart, fun, kind, and about to move away for an amazing business opportunity. How could he possibly be considering leaving our beautiful town? Oh, right. His former boss had supposedly offered him the proposal of a lifetime. Just my rotten luck. I opened my eyes, gazing past the dirt-covered parking lot to the scenic view of the Flathead Valley below. The blue water on Whitefish Lake shimmered, stretching out beneath the jagged tree-lined Mission Mountains, and puffy white clouds floated like cotton balls in the pale morning sky. But even the magic in this picturesque slice of earth couldn't stop the pain that slammed into my chest, since I could be losing the love of my life. Dave had been in Seattle this past week, being wined and dined by his former boss and some of his former boss's colleagues as they discussed the business proposal they had for him. I knew he had to be downplaying his excitement for my benefit, or at least that's what I suspected when I found out later that this opportunity included him moving out of state. He had to know that losing him would crush me, but he also knew I would never move away from here. Ever. This serene mountain town and all of its magnificent outdoor beauty fed my soul like nothing else in this world, and I knew with every fiber of my being that I belonged here. On the other hand, being with Dave made me feel complete in a way I'd never known was possible. So having to choose between moving away to be with Dave or staying here in Whitefish felt like making a choice between food or water. I needed both to survive, didn't I? Expelling a heavy exhale, I dropped my head back and stared up at the sky. When Dave had first mentioned his trip to Seattle, he'd casually said, "My old boss wants to talk with me about a business proposition. I'll be gone for a week of meetings." Unaware of the little detail that this possible new venture would tear my life upside down, I'd foolishly smiled and said, "Good luck." Stupid me. Now, knowing this was not a job he could do from his mountaintop home here, I knew that instead of wishing him luck, I should have begged, "Please don't go. I can't lose you. Just stay here with me. I can be your dream. Right?" I didn't say any of those things, though, because I loved Dave so much that I wanted him to have his dream job, which was exactly how he described the opportunity during our quick phone conversation between his meetings. So I'd kept my worries to myself each time he'd checked in, even though the thought of him moving away was tearing me up inside. When he called last night and told me he'd be taking an early flight home this morning so we could go on our hike, tingles had rushed up my spine just hearing his voice. I was still amazed at the sparks between us, even after all of these months together. He truly felt like my soulmate. I started pacing again, then my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew before I checked the screen that it was Dave. We were connected psychically, or at least we joked that we were. I felt beyond scared to hear the outcome of his trip and what decision he'd made about their proposal, but somehow I managed to press the answer button. My heart pounded against my ribcage. "Hello." "Hi, Angel," Dave's husky voice came through the line. I melted at the warm sound of his voice and gripped my phone tightly to try to stop my hand from shaking at how excited I was to hear from him. "Where are you?" He chuckled softly. "Right behind you." Butterflies went wild in my belly as I spun around in time to see Dave's green SUV pull into the spot nearest the trailhead. A smile spread across my face. I had started to think of that as his personal parking space. That's how often we hike this mountain. I tilted the phone closer to my mouth. "I missed you." "Missed you too," he said, killing the engine. "Ready to celebrate?" My heart sank, and I couldn't find the words to ask him what we had to celebrate. I already knew, though. He'd accepted the proposal and would be moving back to Seattle. I fought to stuff my own disappointment. I loved him too much to be selfish. I needed to celebrate his success because he was my boyfriend, my one true love. "Absolutely," I said, even though a lump formed in my throat. I kicked a fallen pine cone, which tumbled across the dirt. "I'll see you in a minute." We hung up, my brows knitting together. There was no avoiding reality. Time to find out if he was leaving or not. Taking a deep breath, I trudged toward Dave's car as he jumped out the driver's side and slammed his door shut. My belly did a flip. He looked ruggedly handsome in a navy long-sleeved shirt that complemented his deep blue eyes, and his dark hair was brushed back away from his face. His gaze connected with mine, and an electric current jolted through me. A huge grin stretched across his face. He bounded over, scooped me up in his arms, and spun me around as he laughed with joy. Squeezing me tight, he finally set me back down and planted a soft kiss on my lips. Then he snaked his arms around my waist, pulling me close in a way that made me feel safe and secure, if only for this one last moment. "I'm so happy to see you," he murmured into my ear. "You've only been gone a week," I said, my voice catching. I'd intended the words to be light and funny, but instead they betrayed the nerves vibrating through me. I let out a shaky breath, resting my cheek against his hard chest. It seemed like a lifetime. "For me too," he said, his voice firm. My stomach nodded. I wanted to scream that if his words were true, then why would he even consider moving away from me? I was equal parts frustrated and sad as he pulled back, twined his fingers through mine, and led me toward the trail. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, and I pushed his impending news out of my mind by focusing on what goodies he might have stuffed in his bag. He always packed the most delicious, gourmet meals for our mountaintop picnics. Besides being smart, sweet, and handsome, Dave was an amazing cook, a computer whiz, and a natural outdoorsman. How I'd ended up lucky enough to find him, I had no idea. But I did know enough to cherish and savor every day we had together. Now, every second. I squeezed his hand, unable to let the inevitable be postponed any longer. Best to just take the axe to my chest now. "What's the verdict regarding the proposal?" "I'll give you the rundown on everything," Dave said, winking at me. "But first, tell me what's been going on around here while I've been gone. What did I miss?" I couldn't help but laugh. In addition to all of the other wonderful things about him, I discovered Dave had a huge social side. He reminded me a lot of my grandmother in that regard, always wanting to know how everyone was doing. Well, I hiked up the first bend, thinking back over the past 7 days. Mrs. Ripley over at the insurance agency announced she's closing up shop to become an actress in Hollywood. And mysteriously, Bert over at the post office has randomly decided to move there too. "Nice," Dave said, swinging our laced hands back and forth. I always suspected they had something secret going on. They make a cute couple. And it just shows how much he must be in love with her if he's willing to uproot and follow her out of state as she pursues her dreams. I chewed my bottom lip and thought about what he just said. If I looked deeply, I'd note how their story could apply to us as well. The corner of my mouth rose as I gave him a side glance. "You're a hopeless romantic." His face lit up. "That's what you love about me." "I love lots of things about you," I said. "I love you more," he countered, rubbing his thumb against the sensitive skin between my thumb and index finger as he smiled. Gazing into his happy face, the corners of my mouth automatically curved upward. Being with Dave made everything brighter, and almost made me forget about his old boss's proposal. I cleared my throat. "So, what did you pack for us today?" "You'll see." His tone held a teasing lilt, and he squeezed my hand before releasing it as he increased his pace up the incline. I immediately missed the warmth of his touch. The cool air around my fingers felt wrong, so I stuffed my hand in my pocket. Maybe I'd be doing that a lot from now on. We tromped on in silence, and putting one hiking boot in front of the other took extreme effort in my distraught mood. Trying to clear my head, I breathed in the musty scent of dust and pine, combined with the lingering moisture in the morning air. I treasured the smell of the outdoors, but it couldn't comfort me today. Through a break in the trees, I saw the pattern of dry ski runs climbing up the mountain, and in the winter, those runs would be covered in white. Right now, I didn't want anything to change. "I'm sorry we were hardly able to talk this week." Dave turned to me, pulling me out of my dismal thoughts. "When we did have a minute on the phone, I selfishly only talked about my meetings. So tell me about you. How have things been with your business?" Are you still feeling overwhelmed by the high volume of orders coming in from Moxie? Moxie was a successful shop downtown that carried several lines of my beaded jewelry in their store and online. Since I signed a contract with them last year, my business had been booming, and I'd barely been able to keep up with their orders. I'm still swamped. But it's a good problem to have, I said, tilting my head. For so long, I used to live paycheck to paycheck, and even though I'd been working an unconscionable amount of hours lately, the financial reward was a fulfilling payoff. My savings account is certainly appreciating all of my hard work. Just made another deposit today. He touched my arm. That's great. Congratulations. Thanks, I said, grasping the bald eagle charm around my neck to give me strength to talk about work when all I wanted to do was find out how Dave's meetings went. Some cool custom orders came in after you left too. A woman contacted me who had purchased a jewelry set for her daughter off Moxie's website a couple months ago. Now she wants me to make her daughter a matching tiara for her 16th birthday party. It's really fun creating such a magical piece. There are a lot of intricate parts. I'm sure you'll make it exquisite. Dave bent down and scooped up a jagged rock from the path, then glanced my way. Are you working on anything else? I thought through the myriad of items I'd been working on this week. There is one project I sort of became attached to. His forehead wrinkled. Tell me about it. One of the many things I loved about Dave was that he often just asked me to tell him about what was important to me, instead of bombarding me with questions I found hard to answer. And this particular piece had meant a lot to me, but I found the reasons difficult to put into words. It's a little silly. I thought it was only fair to warn him that his girlfriend had become overly attached to one of her clients' orders. Again. Since I designed and created each and every piece for my business, a lot of my heart went into each bracelet, necklace, or whatever I made. A new client emailed me, requesting a personally designed engagement ring for his girlfriend. He said she loves my work, which I found super flattering. He smiled. Who wouldn't love your work? You're my boyfriend, so you have to say that, I joked, wiping a trickle of sweat from my temple. I pushed up my long sleeves, noticing we were already halfway up the trail. The man asked me to create a unique ring, designed from my own inspiration, like something I'd wear myself. I've never had a client give me such creative freedom before. He squeezed the rock in his hand. Sounds ideal for a talented person like you. I flushed at his compliment, picturing the final piece in my mind. But putting so much of myself into the piece also makes it hard to let go, and the ring turned out stunning. Absolutely beautiful. I'd love to see it. I shook my head, climbing over a fallen log. Sadly, I already shipped out the order. I'm waiting to hear how the guy likes the ring and what his fiancée thinks of it too. I took a picture of it, though. I can show the photo to you the next time you come over. I'm not sure I can wait. Can you describe it to me? He asked, always seeming so excited to hear about my treasured creations. My belly danced at his enthusiasm. I chose rose gold for the band because I feel like the pinkish glow symbolizes romance. In the center, I put a solitaire diamond to represent the strength and magic of love. Chills vibrated through me as I recalled my next decision for this ring. Then something magical happened. What do you mean? As I was working, I felt this indescribable pull toward my parents' wedding photo, which I keep on the bookshelf by my table. I stared at the lacy pattern on my mom's veil and felt inspired to replicate that same lacy pattern on the actual band itself. He stopped walking and stared at me. You did something that personal? I raised a shoulder. The client gave me free rein, and he did say to make something I'd want to wear myself. The last touch was an embossed heart on the inside of the band next to the words, "Dreams do come true." It's truly the most beautiful piece I've ever created, I said wistfully. It was hard to let the ring go. I stopped beside Dave, thinking about how much I seriously loved that ring. Putting it in the box and shipping it off to the client had been the hardest thing I'd done in my whole career. Clearly, my emotions had strayed way too far on the surface this week. I bit my bottom lip. Honestly, the thing is, this ring felt special, like the eagle charm I wear almost every day. When I was sitting there, trying to come up with a design, a white-tailed deer came into the yard and a fawn wobbled along behind her. It got me thinking about what this guy's proposal meant for his girlfriend's life. Soon after their wedding, they might start their own family, and I wanted to weave all of that love into the engagement ring. "That's incredible," Dave said, his voice barely a whisper. Designing jewelry from my own inspiration was a dream come true for me. I knew how lucky I was to have my business, treasured creations. Dave deserved that same happiness from his career too. Even though he professed to love his job freelancing, his tone had seemed almost giddy on the phone all week, which made me suspect the proposal he was offered was a career move he would love even more than what he was currently doing. "So, do you want to tell me about your meetings now?" I asked, starting up the path again. The brief joy I'd felt describing my newest creations dissipated. Dave fell in step beside me, wearing a crease on his forehead. "Yes, but there are some other important things we should talk about too." The tone of his voice yanked on my heartstrings and caused my stomach to twist on itself. My mind ran wild with different scenarios of how he would break things off with me. The main one that played out over and over again was that although he loved me, the opportunity was more important to him, so he'd accepted the job and would be moving away immediately. My heart raced in my chest. For a moment, I thought I might be having a panic attack, but the reality was that my heart was breaking into a million shards. As my happiness splintered, I needed to keep up a smiley appearance because Dave deserved to have a career that made him as happy as mine made me. When we finally reached the top of Big Mountain, I took a moment to take in this awesome view of the Flathead Valley. I loved everything about the town that stretched out below me. The charming shops, the beautiful scenery, and the warmth of the people who lived here. This was the first place I'd made a home for myself. Even when my friends and family thought I was crazy, I'd known from the moment I visited this town that I belonged here. And yet, I knew with the same certainty that I belonged with Dave too. That put me in a painstaking situation. How could I choose between two things I loved so much? Dave spread out a blanket in our favorite spot, put down the rock he'd been holding, and we sat down together. He unzipped his backpack and pulled out champagne and orange juice for mimosas, along with a spread of fruit and assorted cheeses and crackers. Everything looked delicious, which only made my eyes sting. Clearly, he felt we had something to celebrate, but the news wasn't going to be something that made me feel the slightest bit celebratory. "Okay, I'm done waiting. I need you to tell me about the proposal they offered you," I said, unable to hold in my angst any longer. I picked up the rock he'd set down and squeezed it in my palm. "We barely talked about the meetings all week. You kept focusing on the weather and how much it was raining there. I want to know what happened, Dave. Just tell me." "Okay, sure," he said, wearing a half grin that made him look almost shy. "Well, you know Eli is my old boss, and we've been discussing an opportunity with his company. The success of his business has surpassed his wildest expectations, and he's decided he wants to give back. Do something philanthropic." My throat tightened, fearing what was coming. I stared at the hard edges of the rock in my hand, turning it over and over. "That sounds incredibly kind," I admitted. "It does," he agreed. "Eli's a good guy. In a nutshell, he wants to contract me to set up an internet service hub in a remote village in Africa. He would need me to live there for an extended period of time." "Congratulations," I said, practically choking on the word. "Africa? That was way farther than Seattle. That's an amazing project and an incredible opportunity." Plus, you loved traveling in Africa and always wished you could go back again. Good memory. He smiled, not seeming to notice my mood was faltering. But every second, every word he spoke, made it harder for me to stay positive about his opportunity. Not that I expected him to notice, with all of his excitement though. The skill set required for setting up a village's internet is minimal, but Eli wants someone he trusts to see the project through from beginning to end. Nobody would be more trustworthy than you, I said, forcing the words out. The proposal seemed perfect for him. I couldn't stand in his way. My work would be helping so many people, which is a dream I've had for as long as I can remember. But I never thought something like this would present itself. That's awesome. I tossed the rock aside, then gazed up into shining blue eyes and a warm smile. He seemed truly happy, and I couldn't take any of that away from him. I forced a smile. It sounds like you found a project that will feed your soul. Just like you have with your job, he said. Exactly. I swallowed my sadness because he was right. I did have that love for my job, and it made my life richer and deeper. He deserved that too, and more. I sat a little taller. Dave had been offered the proposal of a lifetime. It was his dream. And even though I knew this was an amazing opportunity for him, my heart was ripping in half at the thought of losing him. I looked up at the mountains all around me, searching for an eagle or a butterfly or any kind of sign. When nothing appeared, my heart crumbled further and my shoulders slumped. Holly? I glanced up into blue eyes that were storming. Maybe I'd been wrong about him not realizing how sad his news made me. That thought made me feel worse. Of course he knew how I was feeling. We'd been together long enough that he knew me inside and out. Yes? He took my hand, gazing into my eyes as if he were searching for something. Eli offered me an outrageous amount to accept a contract that surpasses any dream I've ever had. He shook his head. I couldn't say no. I jumped to my feet, my gaze darting all around me to the rocks, the mountain peaks, and then my eyes settled on one tree standing tall and calm. It seemed to reach all the way up to the sky. There was a strength radiating from its majestic trunk that spoke of something deeper here in this beautiful place, so magical I knew I had to let go. My hands curled into fists as I stared at that tree and thought of my dad, who had always told me to hold on to the people I loved. Then I thought of my mom, who repeatedly said not to hold on too tightly to the people I loved because what was meant to happen would happen. And I did love Dave, so much that he felt like a part of me. A whoosh of wind blew, swaying the needles on the pine tree gently back and forth. My fists slowly uncurled, fingers hanging loose at my sides as I decided to choose from my heart. Suddenly, everything was clear to me. Without a doubt, my decision was made. I turned to Dave, who now stood behind me. I lifted my gaze to his. I'm going with you to Africa. His blue eyes changed then, glistened. What? I swallowed as a breeze blew past me, caressing my shoulders lovingly. It was as if Big Mountain was telling me that this special place loved me enough to let me go. I belong with you, wherever you are. Holly. I could hear the surprise in his voice, and a warmth filled in my chest that I was able to give him something so huge. I can't believe what you're saying. I've made up my mind. I tugged on the front of his shirt, shaking my head. We can exist day after day, but our most treasured dreams are what make us truly live. I understand you couldn't say no to an offer like Eli presented. I want you to have everything you've ever dreamed of. My heart sped up, and all of my nerve endings were on fire. I glanced at the tree again, my vision zooming in on the ground beneath its trunk where the tree's true strength was rooted. You and me together. That's my most treasured dream. I love you, Dave. Your support means more to me than you'll ever know. I never doubted my decision, though. He gave me a sideways glance, reminding me of the first time I saw him in front of my booth at the Falling Leaves Festival. His gaze caught mine, locked, and something invisible between us was sealed. I couldn't turn down the opportunity, but that's exactly what I did. The air left my lungs and my heart pinched. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Surely, he hadn't said what I thought he had. What? I told him no. He slipped his arm around my waist, then glanced out at the valley below before turning back to me. The funny thing about dreams is that they can change when a new dream presents itself. Moving to Africa was my dream, before I moved here and met you. Now I have a new dream. Tears pricked the backs of my eyes. I don't understand. We're not leaving? We're staying here in Whitefish? He nodded. Holly Andrews, there's a love I never knew until I met you. You are the best of what's beautiful here in this magical place. I could never take you away from your home, our home. So, I have a proposal for you. I watched as Dave dropped down on one knee and reached into his pants pocket. He pulled out a black velvet box, then opened the top, revealing a ring, my ring, the one I'd designed with every piece of my heart. I gasped, my hand flying to cover my heart. You were the client who ordered that engagement ring? I remember shipping it to Washington, but I didn't make the connection. I never suspected. My mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You seemed so happy about the proposal. This whole time I thought you were moving away. I was excited about a proposal, just not the one you imagined. The corner of his mouth hitched up as he lifted the precious ring, the one I loved so dearly, and held it out to me. My most treasured dream is to be with you for the rest of my life. So what do you say, Angel? Will you marry me? My brain rolled into a ball of fuzz, and I swayed on my feet. All I could think about was that both of my parents were right. It was good to hold on to the ones you loved, and it was also good to have faith that everything would work out the way it should. I was never going to lose Dave. Neither he nor I were ever going to let that happen. But now that I had realized what I should have known all along, I needed to answer his question. I could tell from the look on his face that my silence confused him, but I was momentarily paralyzed with delight. Then a sharp wind buffeted me, snapping me out of my euphoric haze. Yes, of course I'll marry you, I squealed, throwing my arms around his neck and giving him a kiss with all of my heart and soul. Tingles crawled up my spine as he slid the ring on my finger, then I glanced over at the pine tree. I think we should carve a heart with our initials in that tree over there, so we always remember this moment. He chuckled, pulling out a pocket knife. And you call me the hopeless romantic? Lead the way, my beautiful fiancé. Then I watched as my future husband carved symbols of our love in our chosen home, marking the beginning of new dreams intertwined forever. The end. The Welcoming Wedding, Montana Dreams 5. I sank back against the white leather couch at Huckleberry Hair Salon, wanting to be anywhere but here. The perky decor belied the myriad of crises that had become my life since Dave and I got engaged 3 months ago. Plus, the dark purple pillows were digging into my back. I adjusted the stiff pillows, trying to relax to no avail. I wished I could just bolt from the salon, but that wasn't possible since my best friend, Michelle, had called in a favor with her hairdresser for this free hair and makeup trial for my upcoming wedding. If there was even going to be a wedding. I'd met my fiancé Dave at the Falling Leaves Festival here in my beloved small mountain town of Whitefish, Montana last September when he'd purchased one of my handmade beaded bracelets from my treasured creations booth. With his thick dark hair, dazzling blue eyes, and sweet smile, I'd immediately assumed he had purchased the silver and topaz bracelet for his girlfriend. Turned out he'd bought the piece as a gift to his mother, which made me want to do a happy dance. Even better, he invited me out to dinner for that night. Yay! Since the first time we met, I suspected there was something special about Dave. Our first kiss sealed my excitement. Our first declarations of love lifted my heart to a whole new level. And when he proposed to me at the top of Big Mountain, I'd happily said, yes. My life couldn't have been better. I loved living in my beautiful resort town. My thriving jewelry business inspired me every day. And now I was going to marry the man of my dreams. Things pretty much slid downhill from there. I appreciate you getting me a hair and makeup appointment free of charge, Michelle, but this is a complete waste of time. I sank lower in my seat, then squinted at the odd gleam in my friend's eye and at how giddy she looked. I'm not sure what you're so excited about. Dave's family and mine can't even agree on a date for the wedding, and everyone's been arguing about it all summer long. What good will it do me to have my hair and makeup perfect? It's not like we can move forward with plans until I can talk everyone into an actual wedding date. This appointment is going to give you perspective, Holly. She reached across the high-end sofa cushions and squeezed my forearm. I know you've been stressed, but Delilah will work her magic and make you look like a princess bride. Her lips twisted to the side. A mountain princess bride. Whatever. The point is, you'll see what a beautiful bride you're going to be, and that will make you realize how beautiful your entire wedding is going to be. After this appointment, I bet everything falls into place. Just like that. I watched her snap her fingers, and my brows shot upward. I have no idea where your optimism is coming from, certainly not from reality. In 3 months, the only thing about the wedding that's settled is my dress, and I'm sure my mom will find some reason to veto the gown as soon as she sees it. I pressed my fingers against my cheeks and blew out a frustrated breath. What kind of woman can't plan a simple wedding properly? I'm a total failure as a fiancé. Hey, don't bag on my best friend like that. Her brows knit together, then she tucked a chunk of her silty dark hair behind her ear. You need to think positively, like the optimistic woman I know you to be. Besides, your mom is going to love your dress. It's spectacular. I should know since I'm the one who pointed it out to you. You're welcome. It's hard to think positively when my entire future is on the brink of imploding. My hands tightened into claws and my chest ached. You obviously don't understand how stubborn and controlling my mom can be. Even if she approves of my wedding gown, which would defy all laws of nature, she might change her mind the very next day. I held up my index finger. A prime example of this is the wedding date. Every time Dave and I make a suggestion, in order to book a location, she says yes. Then 10 minutes later, she calls us back with a reason that day's not going to work. It's infuriating. Moms can be difficult. Her tone sounded casual as she picked up a fashion magazine and started flipping through it, looking perfectly at ease. For some reason, this only ratcheted up my nerves. Wasn't the maid of honor supposed to validate the bride-to-be's concerns? I'd declared her my most cherished friend, so she could at least have the decency to freak out with me. My pulse pounded as I leaned toward her, placing my hand over the page she was reading about skinny jeans versus leggings. I haven't even gotten to Dave's mom. She thinks it would be romantic for one of her children to get married on a major holiday. Her vote is the 4th of July. She wants me to carry a bouquet of red, white, and blue roses. Take deep breaths. Michelle splayed her fingers across her chest and started taking exaggerated breaths, as if I were supposed to follow suit. Come on, sweetie. You're hyperventilating. This is supposed to be the happiest time of your life. That's what I keep telling myself. I threw my gaze at the ceiling, feeling the fire prick behind my eyes. But I've been such a wreck these past few months that Dave is pretty much avoiding me. I've hardly seen him this past week, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's reconsidering marrying me. She shook her head immediately. No chance of that happening. That man is so head over heels in love with you. I'm sure he'd marry you in an igloo if that's what you wanted. Have you tried talking to him about how you're feeling? Yes, but that only made things worse, I said, remembering back to our disagreement 2 weeks ago. I was sitting at my kitchen table and noticed this pair of blue jays outside my window. They were flittering back and forth between two branches on the same tree. Their interaction was like a dance, and I felt inspired for the first time in weeks. That's great, she said, smiling. So I created a rose gold wedding band to match my engagement ring, replicating the same lacy pattern from my mom's wedding veil that I'd also embossed onto my engagement band. My jaw tightened and I paused. Then the phone rang. Michelle tucked her chin. Any chance it was good news? Hardly. My mother called to remind me that I'm her only child, and this is her one chance to be part of her daughter's wedding. Then she suggested we get married on the same date she and my dad did, which is 10 months from now. We don't want to wait that long. My shoulder blades squeezed together, and I threw my hand up. I got off the phone and started bawling my eyes out. Dave walked in and I freaked out on him because he suggested we forget planning a big wedding and just get married by ourselves at Danica's where we had our first date. Oh, we should go to Danica's for lunch after this, Michelle said, a little too enthusiastically considering I'd just confided my engagement was crumbling thanks to my inability to make everyone happy. It's a short walk and they have a fabulous halibut special today. I blinked several times. I'm a vegetarian. Yeah, but not everyone else is. Her eyes widened and a strange expression crossed her face. Then she thrust her hand to her chest. I mean, I'm not a vegetarian. You're not going to deny your best friend the halibut special, are you? Huh? Okay, now Michelle was seriously losing it. Maybe all of my stress had rubbed off on her. Fine. We can go to Danica's for lunch if you want. My treat, although I doubt I'll be much fun. It just breaks my heart that Dave's ready to give up on the wedding, because I really want everyone I love to be there. If I can't find a way to organize one wedding day properly, then how am I going to tackle any future problems that come our way until death do us part? Michelle remained silent, confirming she still didn't understand where I was coming from. My ability to be a good wife was on the line, yet I still didn't have a clue how to get all our families to agree on one measly date. Forget it, I said with a sigh. Instead of trying to convince her further, I picked up a local magazine and tried to push my frustrations out of my mind. I flipped through the pages about hiking, biking, and boating. Then my heart froze as I stared at a glamour shot of Glacier Park, the site of the first moment I'd fallen in love with Montana. Emotions burst through me as I gazed at the picturesque photo. The deep blue sky provided a colorful backdrop against the jagged brown peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Frozen streams ran down the length of the mountains in thin white veins, and Lake McDonald stretched out below, creating a serene effect. For a moment, I felt transported back in time, and I could hear the echo of my dad's laughter as he chased me around a campfire. My throat tightened as I set the magazine back down. The truth is, today's a significant day for me. She gave me an encouraging side glance. Of course it is, sweetie. We're checking something off your list. So stop worrying about the rest of the wedding plans and enjoy each moment. Actually, the special meaning of today has nothing to do with planning the wedding. I sucked in a deep breath. Even though Michelle and I were close in a lot of ways, there were some things I'd only ever felt comfortable sharing with Dave. But my heart ached, and I really needed my friend. I let my breath out slowly. Today is the anniversary of when my dad took me camping in Glacier Park when I was 10. Oh? Her gaze held mine and her mouth formed a tight line, letting me know she understood that I was opening up to her about something very important to me. My dad and I discovered Whitefish together during that same vacation. We swam in Whitefish Lake, hiked Big Mountain, and watched bald eagles soar across the valley. My throat went raw, and I reflexively fingered the precious bald eagle charm clasped to my necklace. That's when I fell in love with this area, and why I moved here after college. A few years after I made this lovely town my home, my dad died. Her eyes shimmered. I'm sorry. I never knew. It's hard for me to talk about, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. Planning my wedding to the love of my life in this special mountain town should be the pinnacle of my life thus far. Instead, everything's a mess, and I can't think of a way to fix it. And worst of all, I just wish my dad could be at my wedding to walk me down the aisle. Of course you do. She scooted close to me, wrapped her arm around me, and I dropped my head to her shoulder. We were quiet a few moments, then she patted my back. I'm so glad your dad brought you here because I don't know what my life would be like if I'd never met you. I gave a small, nervous laugh. Yeah, I must be a real joy to be around right now. She chuckled. You just need to focus on one thing at a time, hair and makeup, and have faith that the rest will fall in line. I sighed, feeling some of the weight lift off my shoulders. But what about Holly Andrews? Are you ready? A tall blonde dressed all in black pranced toward us, waved her fingers at Michelle, then held her hand out to me. She had a dynamic smile and gave off a vivacious vibe. I'm Delilah. Michelle's told me a lot about you. Nice to meet you. I stood and squeezed her hand, feeling a glimmer of excitement for the first time in weeks. Maybe planning this wedding was actually something that I could do. Hair and makeup meant a first step. Plus, my mother wasn't here to smack it down. Bonus. An hour and a half later, Michelle clapped her hands and squealed from behind my styling chair. You look stunning, Holly. I swiveled in my chair and faced the mirror, surprised at who I saw staring back at me. My normally wild chestnut curls had been tamed, resting in soft ringlets against my shoulders. Normally, I didn't wear much makeup, if any, but Delilah had used neutral tones for my skin and a splash of color on my eyelids to accentuate my hazel eyes. My lips were glossed with a soft rose color that very much perfected my bridal look. Wow, I said, unable to think of a more appropriate word. I look like I'm getting married. My voice drifted off as I remembered that this would only be true if I could get both of our families to agree on a wedding date. A large detail that deflated the excitement I'd felt over Delilah's beautiful handiwork. Oh no. Michelle reached for my arm and pulled me to my feet. Don't lose that happy feeling I saw a moment ago. Stop thinking and let's go enjoy a nice lunch. You're right, I said. Although the weight of my problems had returned, I thanked Delilah and assured her that I'd hire her to do my hair and makeup for my wedding, in the miraculous event that I could actually get our families to secure a date, a long shot at best. But Michelle had been right about Delilah working her magic on me. I almost felt too elegant for lunch, but didn't want to disappoint my friend, who seemed to be looking forward to the halibut special with an unprecedented degree of enthusiasm. When we stepped out of Huckleberry Hair Salon and into the warm summer air, I immediately glanced over at Big Mountain and its unique pattern of ski runs, currently brown without the winter snow, woven between thick green trees. As I stared at that beautiful mountain, a warm feeling washed over me, reminding me of a time that I'd wanted to move to this small mountain town so badly, but starting a new life here seemed too hard. Well, I hadn't given up on my dreams back then, so I wasn't about to start now. I just had to think of a way to bring everything together for this wedding. But how? Michelle linked her arm through mine as she opened the rustic wood door to Danica's. But when we stepped inside the charming restaurant, my heart sank. What the? The entire place appeared to be decked out for a wedding. Guess we won't be having lunch here after all, I said, pointing out the obvious. But Michelle made no move to leave. I glanced around the restaurant, feeling both happy and envious of whoever was having their wedding here. Through the large back windows, I could see guests seated in neat rows on the outside deck, which I knew had a gorgeous view of Whitefish Lake. The location was small, quaint, and in my opinion idyllic for a wedding. My mother and future mother-in-law would never go for such a place. They both had big plans for a big wedding, and the thought left me exhausted. Ironically, the colors of the centerpieces and linens on the tabletops matched perfectly to what Dave and I had initially wanted: pale green, pink, and white. My mom had talked us out of those colors. She kept saying that it would look too much like a prom, even though we felt they created a romantic combination with a nice summer feel. Clearly, Michelle and I would have to select another location for lunch, but it was bittersweet to see I'd been right about the colors looking perfect together. I had to find a way to talk my mom into liking them. "Let's see if they have some place for us in the back," Michelle suggested, knocking me out of my thoughts. She kept her arm linked with mine and led me across the room. We shouldn't intrude on someone's special day. My voice trailed off when I spotted a woman across the room who looked exactly like my mom. I shook my head to clear the vision because I had to be hallucinating. My mom was back home in San Francisco. But this woman had my same auburn curls, so coincidental, only hers were pulled up on one side and clipped together with tiny pink roses that went lovely with her silky pale green dress. A moment later, she turned to another woman who looked like Aunt Barbara? I called out, suddenly feeling dizzy. "Shush!" Michelle hustled me into a hallway, just as I would have sworn I saw our good friend Kim. My head whipped behind me. "Kim? Mom? Is that?" "Follow me." Michelle practically dragged me through a door and into a back room, where my gaze flew to a wedding dress hanging on the far wall. That had to be my beaded lace sheath gown that looked freshly steamed. A pair of matching white heels sat on the small wooden table beside the dress. Was this a dream? Maybe it wasn't the brightest idea, but I decided to pinch myself. Ouch. Yep, I was clearly awake, and now I had the red mark on my skin to prove it. "What's going on, Michelle?" Maybe I should be the one to explain. Dave's deep husky voice sent chills up my spine. He stepped into the room and looked amazingly handsome in a black tuxedo, with a white tie tucked into his white vest. His blue eyes locked on mine, and the corners of his mouth curved upward. Then he turned to Michelle. "Thanks for your help." "You're welcome." She grinned at him. "But it wasn't easy. Your bride-to-be is feeling entirely too overwhelmed. You seriously need to marry her before she cracks." She turned and winked at me. "Didn't I tell you everything would fall into place?" My mouth dropped open, and a squeaky, unintelligible sound escaped. "I'll translate that as a thank you." She gave me a quick hug, then stepped back. "You look gorgeous, and I need to go get changed into my maid of honor gear." "You're a very lucky woman." She smiled at me, then looked over her shoulder at Dave. "And you are the luckiest man in the world getting married to this kind, caring woman who can't stop thinking about how to make everyone else happy. She's pretty special." He gazed at me with a smile, and the tender look on his face made my heart catch in my chest. "Believe me, I know how lucky I am," he said. I watched Michelle skip out of the room, then I turned to Dave. What did you do?" "You look beautiful, Angel." He stepped toward me, taking both of my hands in his own. "You've been so stressed, trying to coax everyone to agree on a wedding date. That obviously wasn't going to happen, so I decided we were no longer open to negotiations regarding our wedding. It's not worth seeing you unhappy. I used the notes you and I made together to plan our perfect wedding, which is what I've been doing the past 2 weeks." Tears blurred my vision. "That's why you disappeared?" "I haven't seen you much, and I was afraid you might be reconsidering your proposal." "Never." His voice was firm and he peered into my eyes, sending an electric jolt through my belly. "It's you and me, always and forever. I did want to take some of the pressure off you, though. And since you wouldn't let me help with anything." "I asked you to help plenty," I interrupted. He raised his brow, giving me a side glance. "Buying stamps for invitations that we can't order, because we don't even have a wedding date, isn't exactly what I'd call letting me contribute. My chest tightened. You know why I haven't been able to settle on a date? Yes, he said, touching my chin gently. And I totally appreciate you trying to work with both of our mothers on what's important to them. But what's important to you? To be with you, I said instantly, tears blurring my vision again. I moved closer to him, so that our toes were nearly touching. That's what I've wanted since we met at the Falling Leaves Festival last year, and since we had our first date here at Danica's. I lifted up onto my tiptoes and pressed my lips to his warm cheek. I want to marry you, Dave. Good. He dropped his forehead to mine and squeezed my hands. Because that's what I want too. So that's what we're doing today. If that works for you. There's nothing I want more. I shook my head, unable to believe how lucky I was to have found this wonderful man. I still can't believe you put all of this together for us. I thought I had to solve all of these problems on my own. Maybe that's how you used to live your life. He trailed his finger along my jawline, then up to my cheek, leaving a wake of heat in his path. Now you have me. We're about to become husband and wife, which means from now on it's no longer you and me. Just we. And we can solve anything that comes our way, together. My heart swelled with love for him. So you're throwing me an unexpected wedding? If that's okay with you. He peered down at me, his blue eyes filled with emotion. I know you wanted to consider everyone else's feelings, but this is our wedding, and it should be about us. If you still want to find a way to please everyone, we can call this off right now and go back to planning. Together. Just say the word. No way, I said, throwing my arms around him. I buried my face in his neck, breathing in his lovely sandalwood scent. Suddenly, an image of Glacier Park flashed through my mind, then a memory of my dad and me hiking up Big Mountain and watching two eagles soar across the sky. My throat squeezed, so I retreated a step and lifted my lashes. What made you choose today as our wedding date? Emotions stormed through his eyes. It's a special day for you, the anniversary of the day your dad took you camping here. Since he can't be here to physically walk you down the aisle, this is a way he'll still be here in your heart to walk with you down the aisle. You're amazing, I said, knowing those two simple words didn't do him justice at all. He laughed softly. You act like this is all for you, but it's entirely selfish on my part. You're everything to me, Angel. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that. I gazed up at him and swallowed hard so I wouldn't start bawling right here and now. Did everyone on the guest list come? I saw my mom and my aunt. He nodded. Everyone's here who matters to us. And I know your dad is here in spirit. So, are we really going to do this now? Is this what you want? I do, I replied, pressing my lips to his cheek one more time. Then I took a step back. Now you need to leave the room. The groom isn't allowed to see the bride before the wedding. Yes, ma'am, he replied with a grin. But then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small red velvet box. Your mom asked me to give this to you. She wants you to wear it during the ceremony, but promise me you will only wear this if it's what you want. I promise. I accepted the box, watched him smile at me one more time before he covered his eyes with his hands and slowly edged his way out of the room. I laughed to myself because he was so cute. But by the time I'd slipped into my dress, my frazzled nerves had returned. All the stress that had plagued me throughout the last few months came back hard and fast. Would my mom be heartbroken over not having the wedding date of her choice? What if Dave was wrong, and I couldn't feel my dad's presence as I walked down the aisle? My stomach twisted into a knot I couldn't loosen. Michelle returned to the room and handed me a bouquet of pink tea roses. She'd changed into the pale green dress I'd admired at the same bridal boutique where we'd picked out my wedding gown. I smiled at my friend. You look beautiful. Thank you for helping Dave put all this together. She pulled me into a hug. He knew everything you both wanted. I'm so honored to be part of your special day, and I know you two will be so happy together. Maybe someday I'll find someone I connect with the same way you and Dave do, she said, her tone sounding wistful. I used to wonder the same thing, so you definitely will. I hugged her tightly, remembering back to when I'd nearly given up hope of meeting the right man in my small resort town. My eyes welled, and this time a tear slipped down my cheek. When the time is right, we all meet that special person we're meant to be with. She laughed. There's the optimistic woman I know and love. I love you too. I giggled through my tears, feeling like the luckiest person alive. Another tear slipped down my cheek, and I swiped it away with the back of my hand. Stop crying or you'll ruin your makeup, she said, ever the practical one. Then she dabbed a tissue under my eyes. Thank goodness Delilah used waterproof mascara on your lashes. There was a rap on the door, and a woman I recognized as a hostess at Danica's poked her head into the room. All ready in here? Michelle raised her brows at me. Holly? Ready, I replied, nodding. The woman cracked the door open, and I could hear the notes to a James Taylor song that Dave and I loved swell through the restaurant. As Michelle and I walked past the empty tables in the restaurant, I glanced out the open double doors. Guests were seated on either side of an aisle, lined by a lacy white runner that led up to wooden arch, which was covered with pale green, pink, yellow, and white flowers. I closed my eyes, thinking about how much my dad would have loved Dave. I knew that deep down in my heart. Even my mom couldn't help but love him, and she'd recently said she was happy she'd finally have a son. Just thinking about my mom made me wonder how she was doing right now. She'd had her mind set on certain things for her only daughter's wedding, but only because she loved me so much. I stared down at the thick heart necklace she'd given me in that red velvet box, and suddenly knew I wanted to wear this today. Michelle, would you put this on me? I asked, handing the necklace to her. Of course. She lifted the necklace, then stopped and eyed it critically. What's this inside? I watched her slide her fingernail between the thick heart, then it suddenly popped open. My breath left my chest. Inside were 2 photos, one of my dad and the other of my parents on their wedding day. Michelle and I exchanged a look of understanding. Tears filled my eyes as she clasped the chain around my neck. This was the best gift my mom could have ever given me. Thinking about my dad's absence made me feel even more anxious. I had my hand over the heart charm that rested under my clavicle. Just because Dave thought I'd feel my dad's presence today didn't mean that I would. I usually only felt him in the mountains when all was quiet. I tried to shake the worries from my head as I stopped before the doors and peeked outside. The music changed and Michelle came up beside me. She gave me an encouraging smile and stepped into her place in front of me as my maid of honor. Then she sailed gracefully down the aisle. I peered past her, and the crystal blue lake sparkled against the midday sun. My hand went to the charm on my necklace, and I felt a surge of love as I touched it. Suddenly, the song faded out and changed into the wedding march. The guests all rose from their chairs and turned my way, alerting me that it was my turn to walk down the aisle. On shaky legs, I glided outside and my gaze shot to the end of the aisle where I locked eyes with Dave. The corners of his mouth curved upward, and my heart fluttered. I squeezed the bouquet in my hand as I slowly took each step toward Dave. Just behind him, I caught sight of something fluttering in a mesh cage. As I got closer, I realized that it was hundreds of butterflies that I knew were going to be released after the ceremony. That had been the one thing I'd written down as a dream wish, yet Dave had made it happen. When I arrived at the front of the aisle, I handed my bouquet to Michelle and glanced over at my mom. Her eyes were glued to my necklace. She started dabbing her eyes with a tissue while wearing the biggest smile I had ever seen. Only one thing was missing today. Then I reached for Dave, and right before our hands met, electric tingles coursed up my arm and buzzed gently under my hand. Suddenly, I felt my dad, right here beside me, giving me away to this wonderful man I loved with all of my heart. The tingles dissipated as Dave's fingers wrapped around mine. Then my chest warmed until all I felt was indescribable bliss. "Welcome, friends and family, to the union of Dave and Holly," the man in front of us said. Dave's gaze held mine throughout the entire ceremony. Then, what felt like moments later, Dave and I wore wedding bands, and the man said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Dave's eyes turned deep blue as he leaned down to kiss me, and nothing could have prepared me for the moment our lips met. Warmth exploded throughout my body. Me, him, and then us. We were two people becoming one union, and my whole world shimmered with promise. The end. The Happiest Hike, Montana Dreams 6. In the year and a half I'd been married to Dave, and the year we'd dated before that, I'd never seen him come unglued. Until now. Adrenaline raced through my veins at the white-knuckled grip he held on the steering wheel as he turned off going to the Sun Road in Glacier Park, driving toward the Apgar Trail where we'd be snowshoeing this morning in an attempt to relax. Almost there, and he hadn't grunted in at least 2 minutes. Progress. I stared out the window at the forest of trees surrounding us. We'd chosen the Apgar Trail for its gorgeous lake and mountain views, but today I felt my own secret meaning in the trail's name. My belly fluttered, just thinking about the unexpected news I'd discovered this morning, which I wanted to share with my hubby. But I couldn't tell Dave such incredible news with the vein on his temple throbbing up and down. Yikes. I'd heard that buying a house was one of the top stressors in life, but that rumor turned out to be a major understatement. We currently lived in the small 2-bedroom condo Dave bought when he first moved to our lovely small mountain town of Whitefish, Montana. He worked from home as a web developer and used the second bedroom as his office. Since I also worked from home beading jewelry for my small business Treasured Creations, we were feeling a bit squooshed. So we were looking for a larger home, which we now needed pronto, but had been outbid on the first 2 houses that suited us. Yesterday, we'd fallen in love with a rustic 3-bedroom house with a den, which had a breathtaking view of Big Mountain. This was our ideal home, and we made a full price offer immediately. Now we were waiting for the seller's response, and each hour felt excruciating. But nothing could get me down today, not with the incredible news I'd soon share with my hubby. A warm feeling spread across my chest. I'd planned to wait until the top of the trail to tell him, but suddenly I couldn't wait any longer. With a wide smile, I turned in my seat and opened my mouth. "Still no word," Dave said, his voice tight. "Or maybe not the right time to share the wonderful news." I put a hand on his arm. "Honey, we have to be patient," I reminded him gently, but the vein on his temple only picked up speed. He parked his SUV into a snow-plowed space in front of the horse concession barn, slipped the gear shift into park, then held his cell screen toward me as if this were evidence of some unearthly wrongdoing. "Samantha said she'd be back to us by 9 a.m. But nothing." "It's only 9:15, I said, gazing into his beautiful blue eyes. His facial features drew tight, contrasting the relaxed style of his dark hair brushed away from his face and tucked behind his ears. If I told him the news now, he'd likely stress even more about our need for a bigger house. I needed to wait for a better moment. "I'm sure Samantha will call soon and let us know if the seller accepted our offer. Until then, we should try to think positively. Don't we always say everything happens when it's supposed to?" His gaze flicked to his lap for a moment, then he blew out a breath. "Yes, you're right." "Good." I leaned forward to kiss his cheek, but he'd already turned to open his door, so my lips were left puckered without a target. "Okay." I sighed, reached for the passenger door handle, and thoughts of last night's phone conversation with my mom invaded my head as I climbed out of the SUV and into the crisp winter air. "Are you going to start thinking about my grandchildren soon?" You've been married a year and a half now, and I'm not getting any younger, she'd said. When the time is right, Mom, I'd replied, feeling guilty for not being more honest with her. Dave and I had been trying to get pregnant for more than a year, but each month had proved disappointing. I didn't want my mom let down each month as well. Thinking about what I'd discovered this morning, my mouth curved upward. I'd call my mom as soon as we left Glacier Park. Suddenly feeling queasy, I staggered past the back of the SUV where Dave was getting our snowshoes, and I hurried to a bench on the side of the concession barn. I'd been having these bouts for several days, and put a hand to my belly. Oh. I pulled saltine crackers from my pocket and chomped a handful down as if my life depended on those crackers reaching my belly. The nausea subsided slightly. Dave stopped in front of me, looking ruggedly handsome in a gray ski jacket, matching snow pants, and brown hiking boots. His dark brows came together. You all right, Angel? I tilted my head, my chestnut curls falling against my cheek. I hoped I didn't have cracker crumbs on my mouth. Just getting a snack, I said, grateful the nausea seemed to be settling down. As we strapped the snowshoes on, I considered telling him the good news, but then he checked his cell phone and frowned. Ready to go? He asked, extending his gloved hand to me. You bet. I sighed, slipping on my own gloves, then putting my hand in his. I walked along the unplowed road beside him, listening to our snowshoes crunch over the packed snow. Then my mind drifted back to when Dave and I'd met at the Falling Leaves Festival in downtown Whitefish. Back then, I'd never imagined I could be this happy or this in love. Suddenly, I was bursting to tell him the news. Honey, Apgar is the perfect choice for today because… Aha, he mumbled, pulling his phone out of his pocket. He checked the screen for the umpteenth time since we'd left the condo. I wish Samantha would call. My brows came together. Dave was so fixated on the call from our realtor that he didn't realize the amazing news awaiting him. Sigh. I hoped this hike would ease some of his tension and give me the perfect opportunity to share our joyful news. We trudged across the icy layer of snow on the access road in silence. Dave kept a hold of my hand, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere by the way his jaw tightened. His hand started twitching against my own, making me wonder if he was itching to check his phone again. Anything I can do to help? I asked. He turned to me, his breath visible in the air. I bit my bottom lip. This hike's supposed to get our mind off the house, but you still seem preoccupied. Want to talk about it? He sighed. I want this house for you. For us, I corrected him. I'm sure Samantha will call as soon as she gets a response. He tapped the branch of a pine tree, sprinkling snow off in a white flurry. This is the third house we've bid on, Holly. I'm letting you down. You can't control the housing market. I squeezed his hand, not wanting to let go even though holding hands while walking with huge snowshoes was challenging. If we're meant to get the house, we will. If we're not, this is the perfect house for us. You deserve to have everything, he said, frustration twisting his words into something desperate. My heart ached for him, since he couldn't look past what we wanted and be happy with the treasures we already had. Letting go of my hand, he leaned down, scooped up a handful of snow, and shaped the white flurries into a ball. With a quick flick of his wrist, he threw the ball at the branch of a nearby tree. The movement caused a shower of snow to fall on our heads, and we both started to laugh. I love our adventures, I said, hugging him. The right house will add to our happiness, but as long as we have each other, we have everything. How did I get lucky enough to find you? He leaned toward me and brushed a soft kiss across my lips. Butterflies danced in my belly at the feeling of his mouth against mine. After a moment, he pulled back, and I let out a happy sigh before we started walking again. I love you, Dave. Love you too. He smiled, but then his hand slipped into his pocket again. He glanced at his phone. A tiny line formed between his brows, then he tucked the cell away again. Nothing. My stomach tightened as we marched through the packed snow. Clouds hung low, clinging to the rocky face of the mountain across from us. I shivered, wondering if we'd get another snowstorm over the weekend. That would give us a reason to get cozy by the fire with a glass of wine. Oh, no wine for me. A small smile crept across my face, and I held my giggle in. At the same time, Dave let out a frustrated sigh and pulled his phone out of his pocket. Still no call from her, he said glumly. I reached for his hand. Like I said, we have to be patient. But we've waited so long, he said, shaking his head. I know. I squeezed his hand, wishing I could share the joy I felt inside. I opened my mouth to tell him, but the crease on his forehead stopped me. No, this wasn't the right time either. He deserved to be told in the right way, and I'd know when the perfect moment arrived. We hiked in silence, and a cold wind whipped through the trees. Somewhere in the distance a bird chirped. There were always a handful of birds that never made the trip south, and I was grateful for their reminder that spring wasn't all that far away. As we made our way through the portion of the trail that had burned during a massive fire, I shuddered. The spindly, naked trees made me realize how quickly life could change. But the scarred trees also reminded me of how resilient we were and how we could get through anything life threw at us. Dave and I had gone through a lot of heartbreak in the last year trying to start our family, but we were still head over heels in love and pushing toward the future together. You know what? I glanced over him. We could always look outside of town. His mouth tugged downward. What do you mean? I glanced at the bare trees surrounding us. I was just thinking, if we lose this house, maybe we could rethink living so close to town. I'll get that house for you. Our life will be spectacular. My hand dropped to my belly. Our life is already spectacular. He chuckled quietly. You're right. I know you're right. Why am I letting this take over my mind? You see our life a certain way. I touched his arm, remembering something I'd noticed the day I met Dave at the Falling Leaves Festival. I'd seen a couple buying an ice cream cone for their daughter, and I'd longed for a family of my own. We both have a deep ache for the things we want, but sometimes we have to adjust to what life offers. We started up the steep ascent of the mountain. The cold air burned my lungs as I inhaled, and I loved the fresh, clean feeling of the outdoors. My legs started to ache slightly, and I slowed down, wanting to take it easy on my body today. This trail was strenuous in the best weather, and snowshoeing up on a cold day made the trek even harder. Suddenly, putting one foot in front of the other seemed like a monumental task, as my stomach churned. More nausea? I quickly pulled off my glove, reached for the crackers in my pocket, then started chomping away. This famished behavior felt like new territory for me. Are you okay? Dave asked, slowing his pace. Oh, I'm fine. I pressed my hands against my stomach as a thick heaviness rose in my throat. This was not going to be a pleasant side effect, but I felt grateful nonetheless. You sure you're all right? He asked, concern lacing his voice. His eyes narrowed as he stared right into my eyes, and we stopped beneath a large pine tree. You look pale. He removed his glove and pressed his warm hand to my forehead. This isn't like you. We should turn back. I'm fine, I repeated, needing to get to the top point of the trail like I'd planned. I want to finish the hike. Maybe we can just go a little slower? If you're sure. His dark brows knit together. I've been too preoccupied with our pending offer. I'm sorry, I didn't notice you were coming down with something. If you'd really like to finish the trail, then you set the pace. He leaned toward me, touching my chin gently as his blue eyes peered into mine. I'll follow and do anything you need me to do. My heart fluttered in my chest from the loving way he looked at me. Joy surged through my veins. I spontaneously threw my arms around him and pressed my lips to his. Apparently, he wasn't anticipating my amorous advances because I knocked him off balance and we both tumbled to the snow. Pushing himself onto his elbow, he lifted his head. "You okay?" Once I nodded, our laughter rang through the quiet woods, and I gazed up at the cloudy sky above me. My worries lifted despite the stress, and despite my churning stomach. "Sorry for kissing you too aggressively," I said, giggling. I couldn't help myself. "You won't hear me complaining." He kissed me again, slow and sweet this time. Then we struggled to right ourselves. Climbing back to our feet, we began walking again. Our tumble had reinvigorated me, and I hiked faster than before. Dave easily kept up. "You don't let anything slow you down, do you?" I grinned, considering his question. This might be the right time to tell him. I opened my mouth to spill the beans, but Dave pulled out his phone. I closed my mouth and sighed. Sabotaged again. There was time enough yet, though, so I tried to focus on the serene beauty around us. "Any word?" I asked, hopefully. "No." His dull tone spoke volumes, and I'd never seen him this upset. "You feeling any better, Holly? Maybe you've been pushing too hard with the new jewelry line for your business. When are you going to tell me what you designed?" "No, that's not what has me tired." My voice drifted off and my eyes bulged. "I mean, this could be my biggest jewelry line yet. I've just been, well, honestly, I was a little reluctant to tell you too much about the new line because of the stress we've been under trying for a baby. I didn't want to make you feel worse." He became silent for a moment, so the only sound was our snowshoes going crunch crunch through the snow as we hiked up the trail. "The disappointment has been hard to take. But you can always tell me anything," he said. "If you're sure." My heart squeezed at the sound of sorrow in his voice. My new project is a line of matching newborn and mommy bracelets. My gaze flicked to his face to gauge his reaction, but his expression remained blank. Treading carefully, I sucked in a breath. "I've finally figured out the design." His expression tightened, and I saw his eyes glisten before he cleared his throat. "That sounds amazing, Angel," he said, giving me a small smile. We arrived at the ridge underneath the lookout, and relief flooded my body. Getting up to the lookout would be a welcome break to my burning muscles. Apparently, my new physical state would take some getting used to. "Thanks for being supportive." I smiled at him as I trekked along the trail. The problem with the line is that I felt the dads were left out, because they didn't have a bracelet. I don't think it's fair to exclude them when there are two parents. "That's just like you." He smiled, and for a moment his tension seemed to lift. Such a soft heart. "Do you think daddy and baby bracelets would be big sellers, though? Would you wear one?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. He gave me a side glance that took my breath away. "A treasured creations design? You bet. But then again, I know the artist, so I might be biased." My belly danced. Well, that's what had me so stressed. The mommy and baby bracelets came easily. The daddy and baby bracelets? A bit more challenging. I took a moment to catch my breath, then continued hiking again. I tried setting the stones in all different ways, but I didn't love any of the designs. First, I tried a pendant, but I didn't think a man would want something clacking against his wrist. I tried a charm-style bracelet but shot that down quickly. "Sorry, the design was such a struggle," he murmured sympathetically. I nodded, then stopped in my tracks. "Wow," I said, getting my first view of Lake McDonald. The steel-gray water stretched out below, studded on either side by rocky outcroppings covered with pine and scrub brush. Magnificent. "See? Aren't you glad we didn't let my indigestion stop our hike today?" He stared out at the lake, his forehead crinkling. "I do love this view. You feeling better?" "Yes," I said, wanting to wipe away the visible tension from his forehead. "Let's get up to the lookout. I want to see the full view." "Let's do it," he agreed. We continued to walk along the ridge. When we arrived at the base of the lookout tower, Dave's cell phone buzzed in his pocket. His eyes widened as he pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen. "It's Samantha." "Answer it," I urged, then settled back onto the stairs. "Hi, Samantha." He paced back and forth. "I hope you have good news for us." He paused, listening quietly for a few moments, then his face fell. My heart broke for him, for both of us, but I didn't feel as sad as I thought I would. I believed what I'd said earlier, that we'd find the perfect house when the time was right. "Okay, thank you." He hung up the phone and turned to me. "We didn't get the house." His voice was barely a whisper, then he cleared his throat. "The seller accepted an all-cash offer. We're never going to find our perfect home. It's just not going to happen." "We'll find a place," I said. "We need to be patient a while longer." "I wanted to buy that house for you," he said, visibly upset. "Honey, don't worry about me," I said. "I'm not that sad." He stopped pacing. "Really?" "Really," I said. "I promise." He came over to sit on the steps beside me. "Maybe it's a good thing we didn't get this house," he said slowly. "I mean, our place is big enough for the two of us. Now we can go on that cruise we've been wanting to take." That's possible." I swallowed, a tendril of worry curling in my chest, and my nausea returned in the worst way. He rubbed his hands against mine, warming them up. "And we're both busy with work, so moving would be inconvenient at this point in our lives." "We're not that busy," I said, a sinking feeling growing inside me. He peered over at me. "You mentioned adopting a dog a while back. We couldn't get a pet if we were busy moving, but that's not a problem now." "Yeah, a dog might be nice." I liked that he didn't seem to be panicking, but now I had the horrible feeling he wouldn't be happy with the timing of my good news. I needed to change the subject. Fast. "Should we hike the rest of the way?" "Yes, let's go." He tipped back his head, and we both gazed up at the two-story lookout station. The history of Apgar Lookout always sparked my imagination, making me wonder what life would have been like here over a century ago. My stomach tightened. That wasn't why I'd chosen this hike today, though. I'd picked Apgar for the other meaning, and deep down I'd naively hoped Dave might ask me about the name, which was lame thinking on my part. He probably didn't even know about the Apgar score for babies. We climbed the steps, which were covered with snow. When we got to the second-story platform, we stopped to detach our snowshoes from our boots. We propped them up against the wall of the shuttered ranger station and walked carefully around to the front. The first glimpse of the view took my breath away. From our vantage point, we saw the entire expanse of Lake McDonald. The low-hanging clouds obstructed the highest peaks off in the distance, but I didn't care. Being up this high and conquering the hike made me feel on top of the world. Nerves still roiled in my stomach as I remembered Dave's words about a cruise and a dog. My new bracelet practically pulsed around my wrist. My hand flew to my throat, where the eagle charm on my necklace nestled beneath my coat and scarf. As my fingers slid over the familiar feel of the eagle's crystal eye, I remembered when I'd made this treasured creation for myself, back when I'd needed strength and bravery to embark on the new adventure of living in Whitefish, Montana. Dave and I would now be embarking on a new adventure of our own. But his talk of staying in the small condo we lived in now made me wonder if he wasn't quite ready anymore. A skitter of nerves skated down my spine, making me shudder. "You cold?" He slipped his arms around me and pulled me close, rubbing his hands up and down my back as we gazed out at the lake in silence. Our souls were drawn to this place, to this landscape. There was something ethereal about the way Montana's beauty drew us in, wrapped us in love, and held our hearts firmly in its grip. Maybe we really would find a house outside of town with some property. Somewhere a child could run and play freely in the wild. I could feel the words pressing against the back of my throat, waiting for me to let them out. "I have something to tell you," Dave said, his voice catching slightly. My gaze shot to his, and I swallowed. "What?" Our offer on the house? I'm disappointed. But that's not what I've been so upset about. I raised my brows. No? We've been trying for a baby for over a year now. We might not be meant to have a family, and that's tearing me apart. It's hard. He looked away from me, gazing up at the sky. Sometimes I feel like I can't take the disappointment anymore. I know exactly how you feel. I reached up to touch his cheek with my gloved hand. I felt stretched so thin, like the slightest thing might break me. Do you think we're meant to have a baby this way? He asked, sounding forlorn. I've been doing work for a restaurant owner in Kalispell, and she mentioned her niece is accidentally pregnant and might be considering putting the baby up for adoption. My eyes watered, and I opened my mouth to tell him our good news. I know we have so much already. Each other, our careers, and a little place to live in our awesome town. I shouldn't complain. It's just, I have this vision in my head of the things I want to give you in life. And that includes a family of our own. Oh, Dave, I said, a tear spilling over my cheek. We have so much. All of those things you want for us. We'll get them. A small laugh escaped through my tears, and I sniffed. Some sooner than others. That's what I love about you, Angel. You look at the bright side of things. He gently pulled me to him, leaned down, and captured my mouth in the sweetest kiss I'd ever known. As we broke apart, he pulled me into a hug, his breath warm against my neck. I held him close and pressed my ear against his chest, listening to his heart beat strong and true. Being surrounded by these glorious mountains, I felt love radiating all around us, enveloping me. As we stepped apart, he chuckled. I just realized we never finished talking about your new line, he said. Well. I fumbled for the right words as I gazed out across Lake McDonald. A light snow began to fall, the tiny flakes drifting down around us like wispy cotton. I laughed aloud, feeling like we were standing in a snow globe. A feeling of peace washed over me. There was nowhere I'd rather be than here with Dave in this moment. Still, I wasn't sure how to tell him my news, our news. Even though he'd had his revelation that we'd have our family no matter what, I couldn't be sure if he felt now was really the right time for us. Then, suddenly, I realized that our moments as just the two of us would soon change to the three of us. In the midst of the swirling snow, my heart leapt into my throat. And I just knew, this was the perfect moment I'd been waiting for to tell Dave. He cleared his throat. Holly, are you okay? You seem distant. Quite the opposite. I took a deep breath as a stiff breeze sent flakes dancing around us. You asked about my new line, and I finally did find the inspiration. Your inspiration comes from nature and whatever is going on in your life. Always, I agreed. I was designing the line while we were trying to have a baby, and I wondered why I was putting myself through so much heartache, you know? Moxie had ordered the lines from my business for their store, and I thought of saying no. But I'm glad I didn't, because my longing for a baby helped me see how both parents need to be included in the celebration for the joy to be complete. You completed the new line? Yes, I designed the mom's bracelet in sterling silver, I said, shifting my wrist slightly so I could feel the cool metal of my bracelet against my skin. Oh, you only solved half of the problem, he said, a faraway look in his eyes. Well, I also found the inspiration for the daddy's bracelet by thinking of you. Want to see? I pulled off my glove and reached into my pocket. My fingers wrapped around my gift for him. Look. I held the bracelet out in my palm. It's your birthstone, mine, and... I held the leather band toward him with trembling fingers. A third stone. For me? He asked, staring at the bracelet. His eyes turned glassy, and my fingers trembled as I clasped the bracelet to his wrist. We are, he whispered. I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. Due in October. After all this time, he murmured, pressing his hand to my belly. Even though I knew the pregnancy was too early, I pictured the baby moving under his touch, recognizing Daddy, who I knew in my soul already loved that growing life with all of his heart. I swiped at my tears. Dave pressed a kiss to my lips. We were both shaking and laughing and crying all at the same time. "Well, I'd say this news trumps getting a house," he said. "I have to agree," I said, smiling up at my husband, who finally wore a happy expression. We both laughed as he wrapped his arms around me, then rested his cheek against the top of my head as he placed a protective hand on my belly. Together, in silence, we watched the snow fall to the mountains surrounding us. I couldn't have imagined a more magical moment to share the news with my sweet hubby about our upcoming bundle of joy. The end. The Sweetest Surprise, Montana Dreams 7. I hung up from the most shocking phone call of my life, hurried to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, I dabbed my skin dry with a cheerful blue towel that contrasted the dark gray circles under my hazel eyes. Surely my lack of sleep was to blame for the blaring alarms ringing through my head, screaming that my husband Dave and I had just made a huge mistake. Definitely had to be delirium. After all, I'd given birth to our beautiful baby boy 3 days ago. There was no possible way we could adopt another baby. Plus, we'd outgrown our 2-bedroom condo and were going to an open house today. Since the home was in our same area on Big Mountain, we already knew we loved its location in our beloved small town of Whitefish, Montana. The exterior of the house was rustic and charming, so if we liked the interior and it was move-in ready, then hopefully we'd be transitioning into a bigger place within the month. New baby. Moving. No sleep. Our plates were beyond full. Of course we couldn't adopt a baby right now. We'd made the right decision. Unfortunately, this rationality didn't explain the gaping hole in my chest. "Holly?" Dave asked, rapping his knuckles against the other side of the bathroom door. "Are you okay?" "Just a minute," I called back as nausea rolled through me. I wanted to blame pain meds for the sick feeling in my belly, only I hadn't taken anything today. Needed deep breaths to center myself. Deep breaths. Instead of feeling better, I now felt dizzy. Great, just great. A rap sounded against the door again. Coming. I opened the bathroom door to find Dave standing in the hall, looking shell-shocked. His medium-length dark hair was disheveled, instead of tucked neatly behind his ears like usual, as if he'd been thrusting a hand through his hair like he did when he was nervous. His deep blue eyes locked with mine in an intense look. "I can't believe Marion just asked us to adopt her niece's newborn baby," he said, then raked a hand through his thick tousled hair. "Back when she and I'd worked together, I mentioned we might be interested in adoption. But then I told her it wasn't the right time for us once we found out you were finally pregnant." "I remember." I nodded, pressing a hand to my roiling belly, thinking back to the year-plus of monthly disappointments we'd endured until that joyful winter day in our mountain town when I discovered we were expecting. At about the same time, in a nearby town, another woman got similar news, which wasn't nearly as joyful to her. My eyes watered. "Maybe we should head to the open house. I'll get little Joe." Dave nodded, then disappeared down the hall. I strode to the large picture window in our living room, crossing my arms over my stomach to hug myself, my thoughts swirling as I looked out at the picturesque view of the Flathead Valley below. I grew up in San Francisco, but my dad had taken me camping in Glacier Park when I was 10 years old, and I'd fallen in love with Montana on that special vacation. The majestic mountains, rustling rivers, and bald eagles soaring across the vast blue sky. All of nature's amazing creations had soothed my soul in a way that made me dream of one day living in Whitefish, Montana. After college, I returned to this lovely mountain town and felt those same peaceful feelings wash over me. Even though I'd been scared to start a life for myself all alone here, I'd supported myself with my jewelry beading business, Treasured Creations, by selling my handmade items at craft shows, festivals, and through return customers. My modest income didn't have me living the life of luxury by any means, but I was living the life of my heart, which was 10 times better. When my dad passed away unexpectedly 7 years ago, I hiked Glacier Park with hot tears streaming down my face until something magical happened. I stopped beside a huge cedar, touched its spiraling bark while fighting to catch my breath, and suddenly heard the echo of my dad's laughter through the tree-lined mountains. Right now, I closed my eyes, straining to catch a remnant of my dad's chuckle to comfort me. "Holly?" Dave's deep voice came from behind me. I jerked out of my thoughts, swung around to face him, and dabbed the corner of my eye where a hot tear threatened to fall. Dave raised his brows as he adjusted the baby sling around him, and I caught a glimpse of our precious boy sleeping soundly. Joseph David Martin. We'd named little Joe after my dad, who had introduced me to this special mountain town where I'd met Dave, my soulmate. Now, I was about to take a walk on Big Mountain with my own son. Everything seemed to be coming full circle. If only I knew what to do about that persistent pain in my chest from our on-the-spot answer to Marion's unexpected question. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Dave asked, his voice laced with concern. "We've had a long night plus the phone call, so we can?" "I want to go," I said, interrupting him so he wouldn't mention Marion's phone call anymore. I needed to push those thoughts out of my mind and focus on finding a larger home for my family. I hurried to Dave, peeked into the sling, and brushed my fingers over my sweet baby's soft cheek. My heart filled with love, then suddenly squeezed, leaving a sharp ache in my chest as if something, or rather, someone were missing. Most likely an irrational thought from fatigue. Surely I'd feel whole again after touring the open house, and maybe taking a nap this afternoon. "If you're sure." Dave opened the front door, giving me a questioning look. "Yes." Ducking my head, I pushed past him and onto the front porch, inhaling the crisp autumn air and willing that fresh breath to soothe the ache within me. Didn't happen. The October weather felt cool, and not cold yet, but a sudden chill vibrated through me. I tightened my jacket around me, even though my discomfort had nothing to do with the day's weather. "Let me know if you change your mind, Angel," Dave said, putting one arm around me and the other around little Joe in the sling. Our family trio. Yellow and orange leaves waved against the greens in the trees, displaying the beauty of the changing seasons. Trudging along the walking path, a soft breeze blew my auburn curls away from my face and rustled the leaves in the trees in a soothing, melodic way that should have made me happy. Instead, that nagging feeling in my chest continued to pull at me. I needed some kind of diversion, anything. "I'm glad my mom noticed the open house sign for this place when she took that walk before her flight home yesterday," I said, immediately wondering if I should call my mom to tell her about Marion's phone call. My mom always had strong opinions and advice for me. Then I reminded myself that Dave and I had made our choice, and there was no point in second-guessing a sensible decision. I cleared my throat. Our realtor must not have known about this for sale by owner property, since the retired couple mentioned they didn't advertise anywhere. "I'm sure that's why our realtor didn't tell us." Dave nodded, patting little Joe in the sling in an endearing way as he strolled along. "The house is in our price range and on Big Mountain. Can't beat that. Let's hope no renovations are needed, since neither of us have time with our demanding careers and with little Joe here." At the tenderness in Dave's voice, my gaze shot to his and my belly fluttered. My love for him had only grown over the years. We were so incredibly lucky to have a healthy baby boy. My stomach nodded. Another baby nearby still needed a home. This reminder knocked the wind out of me. I tripped over an exposed root, but managed to right my footing before I fell. Our tiny condo barely had room for the three of us. We couldn't possibly handle another baby right now. Raging hormones must be causing the emptiness, taking up residence in my chest. There was no other explanation. I peeked in at little Joe, who breathed in and out peacefully. I inhaled his sweet baby scent, staring down at his adorable face. Little Joe had Dave's nose, which seemed to be the cutest nose that had ever existed. My lids felt heavy. Even in my baby bliss state, I was so tired I could hardly see straight, especially with Marion's call circling my brain and wearing me out. I straightened, heading around the bend in the dirt path. How could we possibly handle raising 2 babies at the same time? Dave asked out of the blue. His jaw tightened and he shook his head. We've always said we want 2 children, but now isn't the time. I think we made the right decision. Don't you? Yes, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. It's just... What? He turned my way, peering into my eyes. Nothing. I stopped and rubbed my hands over my face, trying to get a grip, since I had the sinking feeling I might regret our decision for the rest of my life. But saying yes would have been crazy. We have each other, adorable little Joe, and we live in the best place on earth. We both have jobs we love, and we're going to look at the house we might make our own. I have nothing to complain about. I'm just exhausted. I know what you mean, he said, giving me a look with the same storming emotions that I felt reflected in his eyes. Adrenaline pumped through my veins as we stayed locked in that moment until little Joe started to fuss. The corners of Dave's mouth curved upward. I guess he wants me to keep moving. I laughed for the first time since we got off the phone. I think you're right. We walked along in silence, leaves crunching beneath our feet as we drew closer to the house. How are things going with the new jewelry line that Moxie's owner ordered from you to sell in her shop? Dave asked. Moxie put a lot of money into advertising the baby bracelet line, which is really taking off, I said, thrilled that customers were enjoying the matching baby mommy and baby daddy bracelets I designed. My eyes flew to the leather daddy bracelet attached to Dave's wrist, and I smiled knowing little Joe wore a tiny replica of the same design. I fingered the matching bracelet around my wrist. I'm trying to decide whether or not I should hire Autumn, that college girl that I interviewed last week. How's she liking Whitefish? He asked, yanking a leaf off a tree as we passed by. This has to be a big change from Southern California. She loves it, I said with a wistful sigh. She reminds me of how I was when I came here after I graduated. So wide-eyed with everything new and exciting. You mean I'm not new and exciting? His mouth dropped open and his brows furrowed in a faux shocked expression. You're not new, but most definitely wonderful and exciting. I squeezed his hand, then leaned toward him until he brushed his mouth over mine as we walked. Butterflies danced in my belly. I love you, Dave, I whispered, holding his hand as I strolled beside him. He smiled. I love you too, Angel. Autumn's great, actually. She's really energetic and found this amazing deal on lavender boxes with pink ribbons and bows for the baby girl bracelets instead of the plain white boxes I'd been using. She's searching for something equally cool for the baby boy boxes, which I think shows real initiative. Maybe you should hire her. Dave stopped on the path to readjust the sling. Since you're getting all of the new orders, you could use the help. Oh, I'd love the help. She's perfectly sweet too. But when will I have time to train her? Where would we work? What if sales slow down and I can't afford her anymore? It's just overwhelming to think about right now, I said, thinking to Marion's phone call again. A pang of regret slammed into me so hard that tears sprang into my eyes. I want to say yes, but I'm scared. I understand. He glanced over at me, the corner of his mouth edging up a bit. But I remember a hike we took not so long ago where you worried about signing the initial contract with Moxie and taking on all of that new business. I bit my lip. True. You've worked so hard to build treasured creations. I'm proud of your talent, and I, for one, think the world deserves to have as many of your inspiring treasured creations as you can give them. If that means hiring part-time help to give you more time with the designing aspect, I believe you can handle the additional responsibility, if you want to expand more. I believe in you. Your support means the world to me. I smiled as we emerged from the woods into the bright sunshine. I turned my face toward the yellow rays, wishing the warmth on my skin would wipe away my worries. No such luck. If only I had a crystal ball that would tell me everything would be all right. We're home, Dave said in a joking sing-song voice. Assuming the interior is in as good of condition as the exterior, anyway. He raised his brows at me, then raked his hand through his dark hair, which let me know he was feeling nervous. Doesn't seem like anyone else is here yet, huh? That's a good thing, I said, my stomach buzzing from nerves. Hopefully that means we won't have any competition. My heart lurched in my chest. Had Marion called the other couple interested in adopting her niece's baby yet? Were they signing the papers now? Let's hope this one works out, he said, probably referring to the 3 previous houses we'd put offers on and lost because other buyers had bid higher or paid all cash. We'd been crushed each and every time. We hadn't given up, though. Our dream was to own a big enough house for our family here. Immediately, my mind raced to our dream to have 2 children. I reminded myself that we hadn't planned to have them both right now. But sometimes, the unexpected occurrences in life end up being the ones we cherish the most. My vision blurred. I needed a sign to tell me what to do. Here we go, Dave said, then knocked on the front door. An elderly man opened the door, and standing beside him was an elderly woman with shiny silver hair. They smiled warmly, making me like them immediately. I'm Clive, he said, extending his arm first to Dave and then to me. He put his arm around the woman next to him. This is my wife, Esther. Hello. Esther nodded, leaning forward to peer into the sling at little Joe. Newborn, right? Such a happy time in life. I remember when each of our own children were born. She gave me a look, her hazel eyes, strangely similar to my own, dancing as her mouth formed a knowing smile. They don't tell you about all of the sleep you lose, do they? No. I chuckled, immediately bonding with this woman. The sparkle in her eye reminded me of my own zest for life and for everything that I loved. I leaned close to the sling, touching little Joe's sweet pudgy cheek. But losing sleep is a small price to pay for the most treasured gift. My voice trailed off, and my eyes suddenly burned at the truth in my words, and how they also applied to another baby. Dave glanced at me, our eyes locking, and I wondered if he was thinking of Marion's phone call too. Fire burned in my chest. Was he as worried as I was that we'd made a terribly wrong decision about not adopting the baby? You're welcome to look around as long as you like. Clive waved his arm wide, gesturing for us to come all the way inside. Deciding where to live is a big decision, so take your time. You'll feel it in your heart if it's the right decision. Chills vibrated through me at his words. Was I thinking too much with my head? Should we be making a decision from our hearts? After all, isn't the heart where treasured dreams were born in the first place? Suddenly, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. What if Dave didn't feel the same way, though? What if having another baby was too much for him? My heart would break. Knowing this, how could I find the nerve to ask him? And where would we possibly put another baby in our tiny condo? So many questions, and I longed for answers to them. You ready to look around, my dear? Esther patted my arm, then moved past Clive, stopping just inside the entryway. This floor has the kitchen, dining room, living room, and 2 bedrooms. On the lower level, there are 3 more bedrooms, the laundry room, and a family room with a fireplace. There is a deck off the living room up here that has a wonderful view, and another deck that leads into the yard downstairs. Let us know if you have any questions, she said, disappearing down the hall with her hubby. 5 bedrooms for this price? I whispered to Dave as my eyes widened. My mind kicked into high gear, placing furniture around the large space, and thinking of ways to purchase furniture inexpensively for the extra space. Not only could Dave have a dedicated office of his own, but I could have a room for my business as well. I'd always loved beading jewelry, picture frames, and similar items at the kitchen table, but if I were going to hire Autumn. Oh, I didn't know if it was the warm energy in here or what, but somehow I'd just made the decision to hire Autumn. I felt completely ecstatic. Even in my sleep-deprived state, adrenaline started coursing through me. I grabbed onto Dave's arm, practically skipping through the open floor plan upstairs. My eyes bulged when we came to the kitchen, which had avocado green appliances and yellow-patterned linoleum floors that matched the laminate countertops. The lack of updates explains the reasonable price. I turned to Dave, wondering what he thought of the charming upstairs. The hardwood floors could use refinishing, but they're beautiful. A light-colored paint on the walls would really brighten up this place too. Don't you think? I asked, biting my lip. I'll leave the creative stuff up to you. He winked, giving me the sign that he was on board with this delightfully outdated rustic house in the woods. Let's check out the downstairs before this little guy wakes up. What? My heart rate suddenly sped, and I immediately peeked in the sling to make sure little Joe was all right. His closed eyelids fluttered, and he was sleeping like an angel. I kissed his forehead. I love you, precious boy. I straightened, and Dave tucked a piece of hair behind my ear. Don't worry about your boy. He's in good hands with Daddy. I know, I said, and we exchanged a smile. We descended the stairs, turning down the hall to the gigantic master bedroom with its attached bath. The pink bathtub was enough to stop me in my tracks. Dave nearly plowed into me, putting a protective arm in front of the baby. What is it? He asked. Nothing, I whispered, feeling a tug at my heart, and a baby girl popped into my mind. Marion hadn't said the baby was a girl, so I didn't know why I felt the baby was a girl. But the bottom line was that there was plenty of room in this house to have a second baby. And really, when it came down to family, who cared about losing sleep? I had to find some way to tell Dave I'd made a huge mistake. And I had to hope he felt the same way too. Gulp. We finished touring the downstairs with its wood-paneled walls and shag carpeting, then we went upstairs to check out the view from the deck. As soon as we walked outside, the Flathead Valley spread out before us, the vast mountain peaks providing a powerful backdrop to the tiny town nestled below. To our right, the blue water of Whitefish Lake shimmered against the radiant sun, and I knew we'd found our home. Dave's phone buzzed, and he excused himself to take the call. I was about to offer to take little Joe, but Dave had already stepped away. When he came back, the surprised look on his face gave me a sinking feeling in my stomach. What's wrong? I whispered, putting my hand on his muscular forearm. Nothing really, he said, running his hand over the sling to cradle little Joe closer to him. That was Marion. She needs to drop something off for another project she wants me to work on for her. She insisted coming in person right now, but I told her we were out for a bit. She said she'd just leave the papers on the front porch if she missed us. That's odd that she made it so urgent, I said, turning away to see a bright red leaf flutter down onto the deck in front of us. I gasped at its vibrancy, a warm feeling rushing through me as I leaned down to pick it up. When I held the leaf in my hand, I noticed there were actually 2 leaves intertwined. My muse immediately pictured the matching bracelets Dave, little Joe, and I wore on our wrists. The 3 bracelets I'd made us contained each of our birthstones, but now my mind pictured a 4th birthstone on every bracelet, sealed on both ends with 2 intertwined leaves. 4 leaves total. Inspiration was how my muse worked. It was the sign I'd been waiting for, and this time the sign had come directly from my heart. Now, there was no denying how desperately I wanted the other baby. I wasn't sure what Dave would say though, and that caused a deep ache inside me. For all his practicality and reliability, I knew he also had a soft spot for our family, so I had to hope he'd want the baby as badly as I did. I just needed to find a way to ask him. Sunlight glinted off the lake, and a lone bald eagle swooped over the water. "Be brave, Holly," the bird seemed to whisper. I needed to go with my heart. Dave slid an arm around me, resting his chin on top of my head. "This is the house for us, isn't it?" "Yes," I said firmly, unable to meet his eyes with what I needed to ask next. So I held my breath and decided to wait for the perfect moment. We said goodbye to Clive and Esther, promising to send over a full price offer. No way we were messing around with a house we loved this much, and Clive assured us if all was in order with the offer, then the house would be ours. All I could think about right now was whether or not Marion would still be at the condo when we got back. We'd found our home, the place we would raise our family. Now we just needed to make our family complete. As we strode down the path toward the condo, I knew I had to open my heart and tell my husband how I felt. "It feels like a miracle that we found this place and that nobody else was here at the open house," I said, tingles running down my spine as I built up the courage to say what I needed to say. I inhaled deeply. "Dave, I think—" "Wait." He held his hand up, then swiveled to face me. He ran a hand through his hair, and his deep blue eyes landed on mine. "This is going to sound crazy, but that house was made for a family of 4, he blurted out. "I don't think that's a coincidence. Is there any way you'd be willing to reconsider adopting the baby?" "Yes," I shouted, tears burning my eyes as I gripped both of his arms. "Oh, Dave. I've regretted our decision since the moment we made it, but I've been too scared to admit how much I do want this other baby. But now that you've said it—" His facial expression changed and his eyes watered. "I've been afraid to talk to you, too. I feel in my soul we're supposed to have that baby. If Marion is still at the house, we could talk to her, beg her to give us another chance." Adrenaline raced through me. "How will we do this?" "I don't know." He shook his head. "I'll cut back on work. We'll figure it out. I know it will be challenging, but couples have twins all the time. So this shouldn't be any different, right?" "Right," I agreed, my heart pounding against my ribcage as my fingers dug into his arms. "What if Marion already called the other couple, though?" "I'll call her." He whipped out his cell phone, pulling me along as he dialed with a shaky hand. Finally, he put the phone to his ear, then shook his head. "Voicemail." "We need to hurry home," I said, moving faster than I had in weeks. "Our best chance will be to get there before she leaves. Convince her in person we made a huge, terrible mistake, and we want that precious little baby." We practically jogged the rest of the way along the path, with Dave taking great care with little Joe, who slept soundly, having no idea how we might have blown giving him his sibling. My heart hammered as we hurried home, and I held my breath as we rounded the last corner and the secluded condo complex came into view. A white sedan was parked in front of our condo. An older woman with red hair stood on the front porch. "Marion." Dave made it up the steps first, and I followed as fast as I could behind him. "We're glad we caught you," Dave said, his face turning pale. "Dave?" Marion held a small stack of papers in one hand. Her other hand gripped the porch rail, and she gave him a concerned look. Then her gaze dropped to me as I approached the steps. "Holly?" Tears pricked behind my eyes, and I somehow knew in my gut we were too late. We'd blown our chance by making a decision quickly on the phone, without even taking a moment to think everything over. We'd said no too fast, and that would cost us deep in our hearts forever. "We made a huge mistake," I told her, my throat tightening as my hand covered my mouth. I choked on a sob, unable to speak. "We want to adopt the baby," Dave said, putting one hand on my shoulder to comfort me before he turned back to Marion's surprised face. "We're sorry we said no earlier, because we hadn't thought our options over. We'd just gotten home from the hospital with little Joe, we hadn't slept more than a couple of hours, and we made a terrible decision about the baby, who we want more than anything else in this world." I'd never loved my husband more for getting those words out, which were so deeply embedded in my heart that I felt like I'd lose a piece of me if Marian opened her mouth and confirmed we were too late. I stared at Marian, then saw tears fill her eyes. A breeze blew by, rustling those autumn leaves, and the whole world stood still as I waited to hear if the unexpected baby would be ours. Or not. I only used the paperwork as a ruse, Marian admitted, waving her hand in the air. Though I do want you to do a new project for me, Dave. I just thought that if you got to see the baby girl in person, then you'd realize she's meant for you. Just like I always knew. You mean? I gripped my husband's hand, realizing what she was saying, and that I was right about our little baby girl. When can we meet her? Holly, look, Dave said softly, gesturing to our porch swing. My heart soared as I saw the car seat sitting there, holding a precious bundle, wrapped in pink. Thank you, Marian, Dave said, choking on his words. I wasn't able to speak just yet. My throat constricted around a lump of unshed tears of happiness. I'm glad she's going to a loving home, just like she was always meant to. She smiled, then pointed to a small bag. Her bottle and things are in the diaper bag. How about if I run some errands while you get to know her, she suggested. Yes. I managed to nod, then walked on numb legs toward the car seat, undid the buckle, and lifted my little girl into my arms. Hello, sweetheart. It's Mommy, I said, smiling through the tears streaming down my face. Dave came up beside me, staring lovingly at her as I cradled her in my arms. I stroked her soft hair that curled slightly around her ears. She was smaller than little Joe, delicate where he was robust. My heart caught in my chest, and I never wanted to let go of our little darling. This is your sister, Dave said, lifting little Joe out of the sling as we sat together on the porch swing. Then he pressed a long, soft kiss to my cheek and smiled. Our family. Our family, I repeated, smiling back at him. My mind flashed to the lavender boxes with the pink bows, and to the matching baby girl bracelet I'd start on later today at the kitchen table with my view of the mountains. My heart filled with love and magic as we rocked back and forth together in the most beautiful place in the world, with our most treasured creations in our arms. The end. If you enjoyed spending time with these characters, be sure to listen to Holly's best friend Michelle's story in The Comforting Christmas, a novella. Montana Dreams, Book 8.